Give me a minute.
You're it. You're the crossover for the new COC governance board.
Did I win?
Dang.
Yeah, pretty much.
Depends how you look at it.
No, I
Okay.
told you.
I kept waiting for them to sit down.
Yeah,
I had to leave.
you're one of the top vote getters there, Ms. Knowles.
This is at the top of the down.
Probably, that's all right.
Congratulations. We're glad you're there. So that would be great. Somehow, wherever that conversation needs to go at COC, would we agree around the table that we would like to keep this group intact till we get done to the end of the work of this task force, or not?
I don't know, would it be beneficial to have at least a couple of new reps from that body? I mean, I know Catherine would be the only one, but, and it would be that, I mean, they would have to decide what to do about it, but.
Can I ask a question? On your timing, the next COC membership meeting, I mean, governance is not even until the 13th. Are you all planning to have any recommendations?
Wait a minute, you're not there yet. Hold
Okay,
on.
sorry.
Good question.
I think philosophically we need to decide. My guess is it will slow down the process. If that's cool and people around the table say that's a good thing to do, then we can have that recommendation.
In some ways, it's like an ad hoc committee, is it not?
It is right now.
I think, again, Catherine would probably be the one to take this back now, but
Okay.
I think it would be a request that we ask the COC to just make the current members of this task force an ad hoc committee of the governors. Or that's what I would say.
And are you okay staying on?
For this?
Yes.
Right now? Sure.
Anybody have a concern about that? Sorry, you're not part of the task force. I'm going to have to really stay with this table. We're going to work with the people around this table. So I appreciate it, but it's got to be here.
Just told you to shut up. I'm kidding.
We gotta be careful about form, guys, because otherwise we're always having community meetings, and this intentionally was from two groups to come together with a select group of people. So if there's if there's no one else around the table that has a concern, then that can be our recommendation.
When there was, if we're, just to recap, there was at the end of the committee the CLC meeting, there, and we'll have to go back and look at the minutes, that the current CLC board would remain until the September.
It talks about a joint meeting to kind of transition.
Yes, that's.
So I would say take it to that joint meeting, see what they say. That's up, again, that's up to them. That's not up to us. It's a recommendation only.
Yeah.
So.
But what are the thoughts about adding possible, I mean, I'm happy to.
I think since we're just exploring and bringing back information, I think you're right. It will slow down the process because it's complicated.
But even to add one or two new members.
I think it depends on who you add. Well, I mean, how up to speed they are is what I meant to say. Do you know what I'm saying? How up to speed.
No, that makes
It's very
sense, though.
confusing. Because every meeting we go to, we're all like aha moments. Like you had one in your last meeting. You know, that's all. These are the minutes since we started Cloudburst. So it's a lot of stuff.
Whoa, yeah.
So, maybe.
Honest to goodness, I don't have strong feelings about it personally, but I mean, I agree
Depends.
it could go either way. I don't have strong feelings.
Because it is just, having done this in some other venues, the only thing else is because it is a group that's working together that is only creating recommendations, you're really not making decisions within this group. And we don't know what kind of recommendations this body's going to come up with. We may come up with a set of recommendations and put other places. We may say we're not going to do anything. So I think that's where it gets concerned, because we think we're trying to build consensus. It's really not that. We're trying to build some sound recommendations to take back to those bodies to have the conversation and vote on.
So I would say specifically that I think it would be detrimental to remove people from this task group.
I would agree with that.
I think that would be detrimental. I don't have strong feelings about adding a couple people from the new group. But that's.
Okay, approval of minutes. Anybody have any changes to these? Since we're just a work group, we don't really need to vote on it. It's just making sure that it's all solid. Since we have voted on the past, we'll do it. Any changes? Thank you, Judy, for doing those. Okay.
Motion to approve?
Sure. All in favor?
Aye.
These are going to be really critical because these tell the story of the process. So hold on to them. We're going to go back and refer to them today. If you look at the last page of the homework, there were several things that we wanted to look at. Peer cities,
Last page.
list requirements from HUD. It's on page 9 of the minutes.
Of the minutes.
Yeah. We wanted to look at peer cities. We wanted to look at requirements from HUD for COCs. We wanted to look at questions regarding that Metro Legal needed to address. Judy brought both the charters and bylaws for the COC and the commission, and ensure legal is present. Check. Thanks, Josh. So in a TA call with Cloudburst, we asked Judy and Darlene to get on the phone with us, to continue to give us their perspective since they can't be here personally, and that's actually where we want to start. So we're going to dial them in just a second. Are we doing this off your phone or they call them?
No, I'm just letting them know that we're calling in,
Okay.
and then they call in the comments.
And
Are they gonna review this?
Yes,
Yeah.
they're gonna present this.
so they're going to present the things. So the things we may want to have in front of us are the peer city grid, and then also the responsibilities of the COC.
This was so helpful. Thank you. It was.
And so when they get on the phone, we'll go ahead and do quick introductions so they know who's sitting around the table. And then it may be helpful if we're having questions, if we would just announce our names to them.
Okay, no.
After down 9.
That would be it.
And then,
Yes.
Hello?
Good morning, this is Judy.
Hi, Judy. This is Liz. Starlene with?
How are you?
It was great, thank you.
Oh, good.
Yeah, but everybody in Nashville got to see the eclipse. Ask them how that was.
Was it amazing?
Yes, it was.
Can you hear us?
Yeah. We can. Where that was kind of a growly man with a
Well, we're going to go around and do introductions for you all so you know who's sitting around the table.
Okay, good. I think that Darlene, also got on as well. You there, Darlene? I am. Hi, everyone.
Hi, Darlene. This is Liz. So we'll start here, and Renee will go around to you. Liz, Alan Fay.
Renee Pratt, Social Services.
Judy Tech, Homelessness Commission.
Paula Foster, Homelessness Commission.
Catherine Knowles, CSC Board, and the Homeless Program at Metro Schools.
Mina Johnson, Homelessness Commission with Metro Council representative.
Josh Lee, representative from Metro Legal.
Rachel Hester with Room in the Inn.
Wendell Seagroves, Homelessness Commission.
Thank you. So I'm going to turn this over to you all. We have in front of us the governance and membership examples, which I think is where we might start, as also and also the required COC activity. So there's other things that we need to pull out, just let us know. But as you were going to start is really talking about different entities, and I think we talked about is what were some possible examples. And I think on our phone, is even, when we talked earlier on the phone, if there's even pitfalls we need to watch out for or avoid as we keep moving through this work. So I'm going to turn it over to you all. Good?
So would it be helpful if we started on the document that we sent earlier that's entitled Governance and Membership Examples?
Yeah, and they're right in front of us.
Okay, great. So one of the things we were asked to do is really to help you all take a deep dive and look at governance and membership structures from other communities that are really similar to you all. Other cities that perhaps look the same way as you do or have the same population size. So you could see what other similar COCs do by way of structure. And I won't take you through each example. I'm certainly happy to answer any questions, but you'll see there's a combination of collaborative applicants that are housed within government, collaborative applicants that are housed outside of government in nonprofits. You will see HMIS lead entities that are sometimes also the collaborative applicants, as it is right now in Nashville. But then you'll also see a lot of communities that participate in statewide HMISs. So these are communities that would have a different collaborative applicant and a different HMIS lead. I think one of the common elements that you see is whatever collaborative applicant structure that is chosen, whether it's a nonprofit, whether it's a government entity, whether the HMIS lead is housed in the same place that the collaborative applicant is or within the state. One thing that you see is that there's one COC board, all of these examples. They're not multiple government leadership entities that are all trying to lead on homeless services. And I think that's a really important distinction that we want to highlight for you all. In all of these similar communities, the COC board responsibilities have either been folded into an existing organization, an existing leadership structure, or the COC board has been developed because there was no leadership structure. But in all of these different community examples, it's one COC board. It's one leadership entity on homelessness in each of these communities. You don't see any sort of division based on what HUD's responsibilities are and what the community wants to do. You see one leadership structure in all of these. Now, one thing that's really common, and I think you see this in almost all of these examples, there are designated seats. There are often designated seats for government, and they're designated seats for community. And typically, community members could be service providers or certain mainstream agencies that you want to be a part of your continuum of care. I think you all have already built that into your governance charter, and so have a lot of these other continuums of care. So that was just a very broad overview of these specific communities. Do you all have any questions for us related to it?
Questions?
I wanted to, Darlene, when we were on the phone prepping, going through the agenda, you mentioned nationwide how many examples you found that had, I just want, how unique our situation is here with having these dual boards. Sure. If you can go into that.
Sure. And you know, I'll be really frank with you all. One of the things that I think Judy and I were a little concerned about as you all are moving forward with your conversations was that your conversations may lead you to keeping two leadership entities within your community. And that really worried us because in order to really end homelessness in your community, you need to work holistically. You need one leadership entity to drive the mission and the vision. Bifurcating leadership, dividing duties and responsibilities makes it really difficult to really put forward a consolidated policy priorities, to consolidate how funding is used, and to really develop meaningful strategies, which is something that you all need to go ahead and transition into. What is your strategic plan for ending homelessness? That becomes really difficult when you have multiple leadership entities in place. And so sometimes you have to go through that really hard step of saying, look, we need to develop the one leadership entity for our community that takes into account all of HUD's responsibilities and what we want locally as well. So it was a concern for us, and one of the questions that Judy Tackett asked us was, do you know of any communities where there may be two leadership entities? And so Judy Ferlin and I did some research on that, and really we only found one community on the West Coast that has two leadership entities on homelessness. And the reason that they do is because they have specific local funding funding coming from a larger health initiative that requires a separate board for managing that funding. But of all the other continuums of care in the country, we have not found one where there are two leadership entities around homelessness.
Excellent. And did any of these cities, sorry, I wasn't paying close enough attention, did any of these cities go through a process of combining? Do you know?
So Portland, Oregon recently developed a new joint offices of homeless services. The Portland Continuum of Care is part of the Multnomah County and City of Portland, and they were sort of dividing collaborative applicant duties. They always had one COC board, but they sort of had their collaborative applicant duties separated, and they decided really to put all their money and all of their staff in one department. And so that's fairly new. They have a COC board, though, that really is representative of county and city and community leadership. They had an older leadership entity in place that transitioned into, that the COC board basically adopted. And so that leadership entity, it has the name of their 10-year plan, took on all of the HUD responsibilities. So it was sort of a pre-existing leadership entity that then took on the COC board.
Yeah, I think it's interesting. My guess is at some point we're going to continue to have the conversation on here is what does community mean? So there's city and county seats. Are those elected positions? Are those...
This is Rachel. I have had the question, does the mayor appoint them? Like, that was just, how do those become designated?
So you see both. So around the country, you have continuum of care boards where a mayor appoints a certain amount of seats, and then the community elects a certain amount of seats. So in Atlanta, for example, where I'm from, the continuum of care here, the mayor appoints a certain amount of seats. The city council has a few seats. And then the continuum of care membership appoints their representatives, and then there's some state representatives as well. You also see, Judy asked us, I think, another question of sort of how does approval work of the COC board, and you see it both ways. You see either the mayor, sometimes the mayor puts forward a slate, and then the continuum of care membership sort of approves the entire board, and sometimes you see the COC board put forward a slate that the mayor then approves. In Washington, D.C., works the second way I described. So the continuum of care board will put forward a slate, and the mayor has a final approval.
And in these places that designate community seats, are those slotted seats for different parts of the community?
Sometimes they are. Often they are. Certainly for homeless services representatives.
Right.
There'll usually be like 7 seats for homeless services representatives. There's an application process that's vetted, and then the community votes on their 7 representatives.
Yeah, I was thinking more of, and I think this is where we kind of can, it's this whole word of community. Is it a community of service providers? Is it a community that represents the entire landscape? When you're talking to these cities, what have you found?
Usually, for what I was identifying as community seats, those were homeless service provider seats. And then there would be designated seats, for example, for mainstream businesses. There could be designated seats for state representatives.
Okay.
So, for example, in New Orleans, they have some designated seats for private sector business, and they have a banker on that. On their COC board, and they have someone from the hospitality industry on those.
Okay, so similar to like our commission, and maybe it is the new CS. Is the new CS, is it slotted?
It is.
Okay.
There are some community members, I guess, from healthcare and legal, which is also.
There's kind of a wish list of what they wanted to
Yeah.
get.
Do you see how that word gets us really confused? What does community mean? And I think maybe I think at some point we need to identify for Nashville what that means and how we approach that so that it's clear and that people know how to come in. Yeah. Are there questions?
I have one for you, Darlene. This is Rachel. So Portland, Oregon, they're the newest, and it sounds like they kind of went through the process similar to ours and kind of wanted to get everybody around the table. 33 seems large. Is that common?
I usually see it around 25. I would agree that 33 is probably one of the larger boards that I've seen, but I usually see them right around 25.
You think that's because it's a city-county?
I would guess so, because there are designated city seats and there are designated county seats, and I think that, and I believe the representation from city and county are equal. So I think it's just they have a lot of people.
That makes sense, yeah. Yeah, kind of that old form.
It's just in sharp contrast to like another one that's 9. Yeah.
Darlene, can you talk a little bit, and it's a very earlier conversation, about the larger boards that some of them have actually executive committees to help with the, with the work
Oh,
that needs to be done?
absolutely. Most of them do have an exec committee, and, executive committees really help shape agendas. There's a lot of work that is slated and referred out to the executive committee to do to really move agendas forward and make these meetings more productive. I would say I think mostly all of them around that 20-person size will have a really strong functioning executive committee. And I would recommend that. I've seen that work really well in a lot of communities, really to just make sure that agendas can be moved forward and that meetings can be productive. Sometimes, meetings with public comment, depending on the time or the issues, can feel like they can get derailed. And one of the things that, having executive sessions can do is really help focus your agenda, focus your time, do some pre-work before main issues are brought to your board.
So team, I'm wondering if it would be helpful to even find, can we get contact people at any of these places? It might be really helpful to talk to them directly. Do you all have that information?
We can certainly get it for you. I will say it is, because it is an open period, it may be tough timing.
Okay. Well,
I'm not sure how much people would be willing to talk because it is an open competition, but we could probably get some for you if you want to have direct conversation.
yeah, actually, I think what we'd just be asking is kind of how they went through the process, things to watch out for, that kind of advice that is helpful, first person.
I reached out after you sent this out. This is Rachel again to Charlotte, North Carolina, because
Yeah, I
they
was
have a
wondering.
room in the inn
Oh.
to see if they'd be open to just having a conversation as a community agency, how this process went, how they felt. And then also I wanted to talk to them about it because they're on a statewide HMS. I want to talk to them about that at the same time. And then I have a friend that used to be on the Indianapolis, and so I've emailed him as well.
Okay.
And he was a finance person that was on. He was not a homeless provider. So I thought that would be an interesting.
That would be helpful. Are there any other cities that you're intrigued with?
I'm sorry, I didn't hear that. Was that a question?
Oh, I was asking the table if there were any other cities, because we could do that after you all are off, but we may ask for some contact information and maybe do a little bit of homework around that. Because I think the more we can bring it, I don't know about you, but if I can get the story in the room, it's easier to figure out how it matches up with what we're looking at. Okay.
Well, can I just offer up a couple of thoughts?
Please.
One is, it seems to me like what you're now looking for is to talk to people who have recently gone through a consolidation. And that's not, they're definitely like the San Diego group just went to a regional task force. And though if that's what the kinds of inquiries you're interested in, we may want to get you a different list. They may not look exactly like, they may not look exactly, in terms of population size, et cetera, like Nashville. But that's a different question of how did you plan and how did you implement your consolidation.
Yeah, actually, probably a couple from column A, a couple from column B. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay, so we'll sort of wait to hear back from you guys what you're interested in on that.
Great.
A couple other reflections on the structural piece, though, about, designating city and county seats and who gets to designate people in them. One of the things to be kind of confident about is, number one, HUD gives you a fair fair amount of flexibility in all that. But two, your governance charter creates limitations and boundaries and a framework around the activities and there's no free-range decision-making in any of these entities once you have a strong and inclusive governance charter. So the question of whether the mayor does the final appointing of first slate or the COC board does it, that kind of thing, if you keep the backdrop of that conversation about where it is in the governance charter, that's not like, there are many limits created. There are public limits, there are transparency limits. That may be helpful to you and to other community members in thinking through whatever recommendations you finally come to.
Thanks. Any other comments on this? Table? Questions? That's really helpful. And I think we'd like a couple of examples of people that have gone through this recently. I think it'll help us hear about their experiences and how it might parallel ours. Are we good to move to the next, y'all? So the other thing that came up is around clarity. And I'll tell you, Judy and Darlene, what we keep finding out is that we are all at different points of understanding the process about a lot of things. So again, I know you all have gone over required COC activities in a variety of form, but I think we need to hear it again in light of the conversation we're having now. So take it away.
Okay, so do people have these 2 pages in front of them?
Yes.
Okay. First, we're going to look at the blue block on the left side. So the big buckets of activities for COCs include operational elements of, the year-round, how a COC operates and what it needs to do, sort of inward-looking and downward-looking to support funded agencies and unfunded agencies, but also establishing reporting and other kinds of things that go upward. The second one then is planning, which is really something that you guys are, this is more ahead of you than here, which is really using your data to guide all kinds of planning and priority setting decisions. But again, that is a requirement of a continuum of care. And again, as we're talking here about a continuum of care, including the collaborative applicant, the HMIS lead, and all of the other entities and individuals and organizations that collect around a particular COC. So then on the other page, we also have a number of designated activities that the COC is responsible for, tied to HMIS operations and privacy platforms and things like that. And then finally for funding. So just to go back and start under operations, just sort of quickly to run through these. This has a lot of requirements having to do with membership, supporting membership, inviting new members, creating written processes for selecting a board, and then very much jumping down to the 5th bullet, developing and following a governance charter. And I mean, not to beat a dead horse, but I think that's a really important part of what you have already achieved. That does create kind of a corral for anything that comes further now. The governance charter can continue to be adapted and amended. Again, you would do that sort of in a public process, but right now you have something very robust in place. And the governance charter actually, in many of these bullets that are on these 2 pages, actually has something to say about it. It may be sort of sprinkled in, not in these same sort of inward-looking buckets, but your governance charter actually does refer to many of these. The whole idea of actually focusing on performance, so that you're monitoring performance, you're setting targets for individual programs and projects, but also at the system level, you're looking and evaluating what happens with those systems, and then establishing and operating coordinated entry. That's a really crucial part of what a COC does. And again, when you think about coordinated entry, you need to open your mind to this will absolutely, in order to end homelessness for the people who are presenting in need at a front door or at an access point, this will absolutely involve both agencies that are funded by HUD, whether that's ESG, COC funds, but also lots of other entities that you want to pull into coordinated entry so that becomes the most inclusive system, helping the agencies then know what's going on, but also really getting clients from the first contact you have with them thinking towards their ultimate housing placement. And finally, something that is very important to just, that kind of overlays all of this is establishing and following written standards for providing and for COC assistance. So that's another way of sort of delimiting what is okay and what is not okay. Any questions about operations?
Questions?
Moving on quickly to planning. Oh, sorry, was that somebody?
I was just asking anybody. Good? I think we're good.
Good, okay. So as I said, a lot of the planning work is driven off of data, and I know you guys are already talking vividly and eagerly about improving your point-in-time count for next year, and that's great. And there's a lot of discussion about strengthening and including more data in your HMIS. That's going to be a very important platform for data-driven planning. So I think the right people are at the table on some of the data parts of planning, and that is, at least you kind of have something of a roadmap forward on that. But you do have some work to do. That is going to take some time, and it's going to take some additional resources, and so that's also just something to think about. Consolidated plan information and collaboration with the ESG recipient. I think you're quite fortunate in Nashville that those activities fall within MDHA. They fall under Angie Hubbard. She's very informed about this, and so that's
She's sitting in the room too, just so you know, Judy.
Thank you, Judy.
Oh, you're welcome, Angie. I didn't hear you at the table.
She's not at the table.
Yeah. Okay. One of the things that's really important about planning is that how comprehensive your point-in-time count is, how robust your annual gaps analysis is, and your strategic plan to end homelessness. Ultimately, these things will come to your leadership, and your leadership will really make a lot of decisions about how robust some of your critical planning efforts are. So it's just important to understand that these tools that HUD, these requirements that HUD gives you can really be important local tools when they're adopted, and you have really strong local management around them and really robust leadership around them.
Darlene, I really appreciate your delineating the terms leadership and management, because as I'm looking at these, and I would encourage everybody is to think about it in terms of what does this mean for governance. So thank you.
What is annual gaps analysis?
Judy, Darlene, annual gaps analysis, what is it?
Communities are required to do a gaps analysis every year. And the idea behind a gaps analysis is really that you all determine collectively where are the real areas for growth and expansion in your continuum of care. What are the subpopulations that you're really struggling with? And then ideally, based on your gaps analysis, you align your funding and your priorities to meet those gaps. And you report on that in your notes.
Thank you.
Great.
And that is probably something that has appeared and has sort of some quick references to it in existing notes, because you do get scored on it, and so probably the team has done that. But I think also what Darlene is kind of alluding to is it can really be a very powerful thing once you have leadership in place that is, sort of accepted and once you really have more data to drive, that's one of the platforms for data-driven planning, is looking at your data and pulling it into a gaps analysis to say, so we need to invest more in this, and it looks like we may have enough capacity in that area. So then we go to the second page and we look at HMIS. There are lots of technicalities about HMIS, but really what is, and we don't have to work on that at this point. There's definitely other tables where that's being taken up.
Right.
What is the responsibility of the COC, however, is to make sure that these things are in place, and those are there are items like security measures and privacy measures, privacy plans. But beyond just making sure, all the I's are dotted and T's are crossed, it's working interactively with the HMIS to query it, to say, what are we doing? Where are we going? Are there people providing services to homeless individuals who are not in the HMIS? Can we get them in? Can we do data sharing? Your HMIS is a platform also for finding ways to connect with other entities like the state. So getting this really robust is a great thing, but once that's in place, this leadership group should not say, okay, good, we're all set. The work of using your HMIS as a tool to drive your planning and to drive your priority setting is a very important thing.
Doesn't that inform the gaps analysis? Hey, Judy, this is Liz. Does that not inform the gaps analysis through your data?
It is usually the critical piece of the gaps analysis. And we usually see leadership boards getting information every month from the HMIS. Things like data dashboards coming out of your HMIS so that your leadership can make informed decisions about things, about whatever may be on your agenda that month. You see the use of data, the use of HMIS being really magnified by strong leadership in a lot of different communities. And we can give you lots of examples of that once you guys get going. But another thing I think, as you all move forward from this conversation and really start putting whatever leadership group you all decide on together, is really having some leaders around data from your community join your COC board. Because you will see how much more impactful your decisions will be if they're informed by data. So you see in other communities, once leadership is finalized, how HMIS is a critical part to not only educating the leadership, but helping make decisions.
Helpful. Cool.
And so finally, the lifeblood of much of this work is the funding. So, and this part is kind of the inward-looking requirements of the COC, which is making sure that the NOFA is filled out, comprehensively, and that it really reflects what's been going on in the community. The funding piece here, again, is focused on the NOFA. It also is a responsibility of because of the ESG link with the ESG recipients, it's also providing the data to ensure that the ESG funds are properly spent and sort of strategically allocated. I think what we see in really strong COCs is, in a way, once the grants management and funding management gets set up well within the management entity, that is then the place where you can be looking to expand the numbers and the kinds of funders that you go to. That group will then be, pumping out data to support requests and all kinds of things that you could be sending off to foundations, to corporate boards, to cause-related marketing with local businesses. So the funding, again, it's like you set yourself up with an infrastructure to make sure you can keep these funds flowing and try to get more funds through your innovative programming. But you also can go beyond that once you have this kind of humming along. Another thing we see around funding from a leadership perspective is that once a community establishes its leadership board and it is accepted, within Nashville, for example. Like, this is the leadership board around homelessness in Nashville. What we often see in other communities is your city resources. And some of your state resources are also allocated through that leadership board. We see a lot of communities, going to, for example, whatever committee may be making your NOFA funding decisions, using that same committee to make state funding decisions or city funding decisions, because there's an established leadership structure in place and an established committee that's normed to the policy priorities of your city.
So here's the concern.
Instead of reinventing the wheel,
So
it all happens, all of the publicly funded decisions happen in one place.
So, Darlene, one of the concerns that we've heard around the various tables is the possibility for this entity to compete for funding and potentially take money away from service providers. Can you?
A lot of communities put things in their governance charters that your leadership wouldn't necessarily be taking money away. Your leadership would be making funding decisions. But if the concern is that the collaborative management would be taking money away, a lot of communities put things in their governance charter that say, for example, our collaborative applicant will not be a direct service provider. And that in and of itself means that they would not be a grantee for direct service. So that's a pretty easy way that a lot of communities address that. And then your collaborative applicant, which is really that management piece, is really focused on managing.
That's helpful.
What about taking away from other agencies that aren't a part of?
Who is that?
Daryl.
That's Daryl. Hi, Daryl.
Hey, somehow I got in finally. Mandy helped me.
Could you ask the question again? I'm sorry.
Yes, let's see if I can word this correctly. As far as being in competition, so you have agency A who's not getting HUD funding, but then you have all the funders at the table with the COC, and the individual agency is now competing against a collaborative, which is a harder lift, a heavier lift.
Well, the idea behind collaborative funding is more that if we have a common approach and if we have a common message and we have a unified set of policy priorities, funders are just more amenable to that. So the idea would be that the collaborative applicant keeps that money. It would be subbed out.
Well, that's the issue. If all the agencies don't fall in line with what the COC's priorities are, those niche markets, because they're not a priority, get bumped to the back of the line because the community says, hey, we want to do things this way, and you've got these gaps that you're trying to serve that don't fall into doing things this way. Those agencies then have a heavier lift towards the funders. If everybody said, oh, this is our philosophy now, we're going this direction, and you have agencies saying, but that's not our philosophy, we're not going that direction, then it sends a confusing message if we're not all saying we're going the same direction in the same way. And I'm talking about housing first, just to be transparent.
Oh, okay. So I would say if there are, this happens in some communities, this happens a lot.
Eyes near the table.
I would say, and I'll give you one example that I know of in a Southern Continuum care. There is one really large community organization that is really committed to recovery and doesn't necessarily agree with housing first. The strategy there has really got to be finding funders that believe in recovery, right? If you have a niche market, you have to find the funders that believe in that niche market. Often it's faith-based communities, it's faith-based funders. And if you're committed to a certain model, then the strategy for those community-based organizations is finding the right funder for that. In the South, for homeless service providers, Chick-fil-A is one of the biggest that really believes in recovery models, for example.
We're concerned about our existing funders, the private foundations here, where a lot of us who aren't as heavy on the housing first, who are in recovery. If the city is saying, hey, we're going this direction, and we're trying to get all the funders at the table saying, we're going this direction, those of us who traditionally have gotten those money have got to go in and now defend why we're not doing this model and try to do it in a way that's not putting down another model. So now,
I don't think it's defending your model. It's just promoting your model as an option.
Well, it's not. Yeah. Okay. Okay. All right. Thanks.
I think, this is Rachel, I think if I heard you right, Daryl, what we have to do is avoid some of the things that we've done in the past.
Like what?
Well, if we're going to have funders at the table, in the past, I think we looked at a pendulum swing, and it was either all or nothing.
Right.
And I think the gaps analysis is really where we can identify not only what our portfolio is, but what's missing and who's going to fall out of the system if we don't have a safety net for them, which are people who are a niche. And so I think being able to communicate that in white papers or whatever to funders is our job.
I think
all of our jobs, instead of saying we're all doing this or we're all doing that, because there's no way we're all going to do one thing.
But I think, and this is Paula, I think that's actually part of the whole continuum of care.
Mm-hmm.
If you're truly a continuum, then you may have a specific focus of housing first as a model for homeless services, but as part of that continuum, there are abstinence-based programs that are not going to be housing first that are incredibly important to the continuum.
Right.
And so there's got to be a way to incorporate all of that as we're talking about all this. We can't, you're right, we can't leave.
We just didn't communicate it, I think, originally, and it left a lot of conversations.
It can be.
Well, but I also think that part of what happened is that when we're talking about a continuum of care that should be multi-funded, not singly funded. And I think, Daryl, part of what you're talking about is when it comes to the HUD funding began to leave out and reprioritize and get away from things that weren't housing first, because that's HUD's priority.
And that's where we should come in as a
We have failed
city.
as a community, and
Right.
I think we have, and this is why we're at this table. We failed as a community to be able to incorporate the entire continuum outside of HUD funding and continuing to support places like Welcome Home Ministries.
Right.
We haven't done that well, which is why I think we're at the table now to figure out how we can do this better so that we don't leave out agencies like Welcome Home and other abstinence-only programs that are part of our continuum of care, even though they're not receiving HUD funding because they're not part of HUD's priorities. I think those are different things that we need to make sure that we're
This is a
talking
good side
about.
note, I think, for however governance is held, that's one of their tasks that they're going to take on is educating funders.
Right.
I think that's it. The other thing is, I think just back with and it's just a commission focus, is when we talked about housing focused, person-centered, which says to me that it's that yes and, understanding that, of course, we want everybody to be able to move into homes.
Right.
If you're unhoused, how do we help you move into homes? The path to get there is not just one step. And so I think, Daryl, to your point, that whatever entity, however we decide to do this or keep separate, we still have to have, I believe, kind of a citywide approach or belief system about this, so we're operating, so you actually can have a continuum that operates within a frame.
Right.
Versus just a constellation of services.
Right.
Yeah?
Well, and we see the defunding on the horizon with the whole coordinated entry that the no wrong door doesn't seem, from my understanding, no wrong door doesn't seem to be there. It seems to be, if you're going to get these funds, you can only take our referrals, which really messes up my whole referral system that I've built 20 years to build a reputation to people to my program.
But again,
anyway, that's another conversation off. But that's the funding that we know we're going to have to replace eventually because we're not going to agree to that philosophy.
yes,
So,
Daryl, and I think that's exactly
it creates a gap for us, and we've got to do some things.
But that's exactly what we're saying. As part of the continuum of care, you may no longer receive HUD funding because HUD has changed their priorities. That the continuum of care needs to figure out a way to bring in not just the HUD fundings, but funding that's going to support what you're doing as well, because you're part of that continuum. And that should be what this whole continuum of care is doing as a joint together. Like Liz said, it shouldn't be either or, it should be yes and we should be doing all of this, not just HUD funding, but looking at funding from across the board.
And along with that,
When they continue to bring in other funds other than CLC funds, I mean HUD funding, because obviously we've had to be diversified. We've got plenty of other funding streams, but we're concerned about those streams going away because now everybody's saying, here's the latest, greatest thing, do it instead. And it's probably a fear-based thing. we're gonna be okay.
Other comments? Eric's joined us.
Hi, everybody.
Hi, Eric.
Sorry I'm late.
Glad you're here. Other questions on funding? What else do you need to tell us?
Yeah, right, go ahead, Liz.
No, for you all, what else do you need to tell us? What else do we need to know? That was to Judy and Darlene.
You have done a lot of, in our view, you guys have actually been working very hard to line yourselves up to a decision point, and I think you've done a nice job with that. I think you need to kind of take a deep breath and take a step forward and say, now we've done so much analysis, and we all understand that getting to a unified, integrated planning and decision-making structure will allow us to move forward. And there, it could look a million different ways. Here's our recommendation, your recommendation, not our recommendation, but I'm speaking for you. Here's our recommendation. Here's why we think here are the strengths. But here are also, I guess what I'm trying to say is, speak also to the fears and concerns that people have. People in the community have expressed a lot of concern about access, inclusion, transparency, presence at the table. So I would say what we've heard you guys doing is really good, but in your messaging as you bring it out, put that stuff out front. How community members, how advocates and people with lived experience will be plugging in to this system. How the governance charter frames up their space for communication and their space for contribution and allows the Continuum to move forward through a voting-based system. So we think you're really ready to go. And I think based on months back, I think the community is ready also. They're just concerned. And so if you can try to speak to their concerns early and come out with a model, I think you're going to find a lot of energy that's been bound up, released. I think Judy just spoke really well about, taking your past into context and thinking about being really thoughtful in the way that you move forward. And I'm going to give you a secondary piece of advice that builds on that. It's really important to look to your past. It's really important to bring your entire community with you along this journey of transformation that you all are going on. It's really important to bring every kind of service provider with you. Your abstinence-based ones, your indie-focused ones, every customized service provider and every more mainstream service provider will have a part in your continuum of care. But you have to look towards the future. And I want you all to think about the long game in this as well. If you all really want to be one of the leading cities in the country at ending homelessness, you really want to reduce your population, you've got to think about the other players that need to be at the table. You all have a vibrant private sector community that needs to be a part of these conversations because they bring different resources. They bring different resources. They bring more flexible resources than your government resources will ever provide. If you can find your homeless champion in your private sector, they will be a better mouthpiece for homeless services than any individual service provider can because they have a larger base from which they can send forth your message. So really think about who is not at the table now that needs to be at the table. And the secondary thing that I would advise as you look towards your future is really think about your government. Your homeless ordinance is a really powerful thing because what it says is that your government is on the hook for homelessness too. I work in so many communities where we are trying in vain to get government involved, especially in southern communities. Southern communities where municipalities may not have services built into their charter. what you have is an ordinance which is really, really powerful. And one of the things that may give you from a leadership perspective, as you all think about merging and consolidation, is a path directly into your government to talk about major homeless issues. And potentially a more flexible path to funding that may outshine your HUD funding in future years. So think about your private sector partners that need to be at the table, and don't dismiss the fact that you have government at the table now.
Great advice.
I think that's all from us.
Any last questions before we let them go on with their day? Thank you both so much for being with us today.
Good. Well, good luck in your processes today, and I guess we'll wait to see if other things arise in your conversation that you'd like us to think about or talk about. So we'll wait for kind of an email from Judy and or Liz requesting our further research.
Perfect.
Does that work on your end?
Perfect. Yes. Thank you.
Thanks. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Let's just kind of do a 5-minute debrief, and then we might even take a quick potty break. What do you think? Key points taken away from their information, the information they provided.
We don't have a choice, I think, if we're going to get in line with the rest of the country, but to move forward in this conversation is what I heard. If only one other community has a dual leadership, we're never going to have anybody to call as our experts if we continue this system.
Daryl, are you still on the phone?
I ended the call.
Sorry.
Sorry, I kicked him off. Call it.
You want to responses to what Rachel just said?
I think she's got a valid point about getting groups involved with continuum care that are out there doing footwork that aren't involved with it now. I think that's real important.
And I think that funding piece is hard, and I certainly understand everything that Daryl's saying, but I do think that where we can end up with this one unified structure will be a much more level playing field and more fair. So if you don't fit that HUD priority, we are going to help find some other way to fund. I'm not saying that you can't. We don't need you.
There's funding out there besides HUD.
And I think that's going to be a hard sell to a lot of the agencies. But I think that in our messaging, we have to be really clear that this is not about trying to squeeze everybody into the HUD box. This is saying we're going to use our HUD resources where they're appropriate, but then we are going to work really, really hard to bring other money to the table for those agencies that don't fit into the HUD games.
I agree, yes.
And I think that's what agencies need to hear from this group, because I think their past experiences, they're just getting pushed to the side because they're transitional housing or they're not housing first, and I think that's what we really got to work hard on messaging.
All right.
Well, I will tell you that, I think most of you know that I've kind of been on the side of keeping things separate because I just couldn't figure out how it's supposed to look like. I've kind of been that naysayer. This conversation actually has brought me more to we need to fix this by bringing something together. I do still believe, and I'm going to continue to be that person that said the devil is in the details. I do think the devil is in the details, and what is that going to look like, and how are we going to make sure that it is going to do all those things that we just talked about. I think that it's incredibly important to try to figure out how to make that happen. And I think part of it is is hearing that, while sometimes it's great to be unique, maybe this is not the best way to be unique. I mean, Nashville having a governmental homelessness commission and a COC that's made up of a whole bunch of other people that are service providers, maybe that's not the right uniqueness to have. Maybe we need to bring those people closer together and figure this out in a different way. But I do still, again, I'm going to say the devil is in the details. So if we're gonna do this, then we've got to figure out what is it going to look like, who gets to appoint who to it, what's it structured, can it raise money, those things have to be ironed out before we can make any kind of presentation.
Yes.
Yeah, I would assume those are the recommendations we would be making, not just, hey, let's do it together.
Right,
Or
exactly.
let's not do it together. Other comments about what you heard? So I also heard kind of this notion of, or maybe I was listening to myself as they were talking, is, will there be fallout? My guess is there will be. Is it going to fit for everybody? It's probably not going to fit for everybody. We'd love it to, but And it's my trying not to be Pollyanna and try not to sell something that, will there be organizations that fall outside of it? Possibly. My question to those organizations is, how do we bring you inside? You know, having worked with nonprofits a lot, you're always reviewing how are you meeting your mission? What's your mission and how well are you meeting it? Is the mission still viable and valid? You have that question ask your question that every 3 years. So just think as we go on, the intent is to bring everybody together. And yet, will there be fallout?
My perspective is, if we did our job very good, none of us will be sitting on this table because there will be no homeless people on the street. That's the ultimate goal. So every service provider will disappear in an ideal world. But we know the reality. Not everybody have a house, may not be able to continue to live on the house. That's why we need somebody to cater that needs. So from that perspective, I think everybody has to be at the table. And then, so nobody will fall out, because we have to, find a safety net for every single individual. You said, person center. So we have to kind of find the community and structure to, help each and unique individual. And, goal is no homeless person on the street, but reality, it may happen. So if it happens, how can we holistically, strategically address? I think that's the goal for, our mission.
Other comments?
I have one educational piece. It's again around the housing first. I'm still hearing conflicting around the table in this discussion. It's still not clearly understood what housing first is. It's not a program. A lot of times people think it's permanent supportive housing, but housing first is an approach. It goes for transitional housing, it goes for emergency shelter, it goes for whatever programs that are out there. And I'm really gonna put myself some homework together to get some more, dig a little bit deeper how we can all be really educated around.
And do we share that definition at this table?
Yeah, I mean, I love it when you always define it as housing now, like here's what we have for you today. Mm-hmm. I think that answers the question for me.
Housing first is not house only. It needs to support. People need different approaches. People need to, not everybody, if there's need choices,
I think
transitional housing,
People hear when you say housing first is that we have an apartment right now, you're homeless, we're going to put you in that house. Regardless of whether you're clean and sober, regardless of whether or not you have income, regardless of anything else, we're going to put you in the house first. Then we're supposed to wrap all these services around you. What happens, unfortunately, from the service provider perspective is we put people in the house, we don't have the services to wrap around them, so they fail.
But
so
you just described permanent supportive housing, not housing first.
So tell her what the difference is.
What's the difference is, housing first is to address, the goal is to get people to a permanent place as soon as possible. But you have options, and you deal with the reality that some people are going to be in shelter first because we don't have housing right away for them, or there are barriers that they can't get into housing. So it's really that low or no barrier of entry to any program that is kind of the housing first philosophy. The other piece is also housing first. Sometimes that's where I need to really think about and come back with how do I do it to explain it better without confusing people. Because I think when I just frankly speak off the cuff, I sometimes confuse people more. But also transitional housing. There have to be options for people who want to live in a group setting, in a sober setting, and I am describing Daryl's program right now. That there are certain requirements that he will have to live there, but the housing first piece then comes in. The goal is to help the people move as quickly to the housing, permanent housing, with the right support around it as possible. Not to have to pass certain hoops, certain if you don't do this and this, you're back on the street. The goal is always that people are not ending back in homelessness. As long as we have programs that apply for funding, and I'm talking about HUD funding, where it's okay to have outcomes where 50% of the people end up back in homelessness, I'm questioning what we're doing. If I get money for a program, it's more about really housing is the end goal with the right support around it, but we need to serve people wherever they present and also address some of their needs and some of their options, trying to have options for them that address those needs in the right way. And it goes. I've talked to people that say, I cannot live by myself in an apartment because that triggers my drinking. So what do we then need to create around that? And I hear you loud and clear, and I'm 100% with you. We do not address the right support around when we put people in housing. We have used housing first as this term, put people in housing, and then great if there's support, and if not, then too bad. We haven't attached the funding to each unit that needs to be permanent supportive housing. And that's kind of where, frankly, I'm going in my thoughts with any money that we have at the Commission to really attach funding to units once people are housed. That's permanent supportive housing. But I'm going to try to do a better job as I work to come back and describe that, send something out, have questions come back and forth, because this is the group that also can teach me how to better talk about that.
I think it's a challenge. I think it's a challenge for us to look at, and I also believe that we as a city don't have a shared view on it. And until we do, whatever that view is, we're always going to be piecemealing it together. So, are we ready? Why?
Well, because that was under my breath. I said maybe we should quit calling it housing first, because I think that from what you just described, then that's a misnomer. You're not. And I hear what you're saying. That doesn't sound far off from what I think we're trying to do. And
so housing focused?
Maybe. I don't know. Because housing first has been, not just in this city, but in other cities, been used in the way that I described it. Yes. And so if that's housing first, then what you're describing is not really housing first, it's something else. Although maybe it's supposed to be.
I know. I mean, it's like
and I hear that. That's what I'm saying. There is confusion when you say housing first. Everybody thinks that means put them somewhere, even if it's not in a. I hear you. Maybe you put them but you put somebody somewhere before you do anything else, because you want to decrease the barriers. You want to get them off the street, and wherever they need to go, that's where you want to put them. But that's just, it's not what people are hearing and understanding. And I don't know.
Well, and the shift is
HUD's calling it that. I don't think we can change the name of it, but still.
Yeah, and I can.
The other thing is, I think we have to be careful, and I know you don't mean it this way. We don't put people anywhere.
Right.
We help people get access to what they need, right?
Absolutely.
I mean,
absolutely.
We help them find that piece. Okay.
But every strategy is going to have messaging and education.
Yeah.
Like, we can't say that enough. It keeps coming up. So.
Right.
I guess my question is, how important is this discussion, this debate, to the core question of leadership and what we're trying to do here?
It's probably the point is, because it was a great way to segue into a break. It's really probably about philosophy, which does talk about leadership. I don't think we have to determine what that philosophy is until we get to the new entity, but it's one of those things as we're looking at it, just to see kind of where are we of like minds and where are the differences, because differences help inform us to get us to someplace else.
Yeah, when we were doing the GC for the COC, we really steered away from it because we had so much fundamental leadership work to do in the beginning. So in order to build trust among all the players, we just didn't go there. Just offering that. So.
10 minutes? Some of this was sparked a little bit about, for those that weren't in, we had a Homeless Commission Exec Committee right before this one, and so part of the conversation started then, and it really gets into the next on the agenda, looking at the governance model discussion.
You're good. Yeah, we're fine.
I am still reluctant in this seat. You can influence me of course, just to say, okay, well, let's forget about it, let's just figure out what we're going to do with one. I think we still need to go through the conversation we're having. I think it'll keep informing us if that truly is the decision of this table, kind of to Paula's point around the devil's in the details. So first, the models to be discussed were the enhanced version of COC Governance Board and MHC Board, a combined governance board for both of those, and a standalone commission with combined boards. I would like to deal a little bit with the third one and see if we still need to consider it or not. And some of this came from a conversation earlier. What we thought might be helpful around that is one, to kind of understand what the relationship is now between social services and MHC, and then to talk about the pros and cons, and in light of this, how does it influence a governance structure? Is that fair? So first, let's do some education of ourselves. So do you want to talk, Renee, a little bit about?
Initially, when the commission started with social services, they were under a planning and coordination unit. So it wasn't really viewed as a department or a commission, but a part of social services around planning and coordination. Once it moved to MDHA, it became more of a commission around hiring a director or appointing a director, which was Clifton Harris, who was already in the position, and then looking at what role they played as it related to MDHA. Then they came back to social services, and when they initially came back, we viewed the commission more as not necessarily being under social services, but as a partner to social services, looking at the role of planning and coordination being more just that, planning and coordinating around homelessness services and social services providing those services in the community. Although we're not identified as a department specifically around homeless issues, what we found in the last probably 5 years is that primary customer base is people that are homeless or trying to stay in their homes. So with that, I realized in the last meeting that we had that it was very important to understand, because there's a lot of concern around the commission reporting to social services and social services commission making those final decisions. Just to provide you with a bit of history around that, with the previous director, Will Connolly, we never had any issues that came to the commission that were denied or were not voted on and approved that the Homelessness Commission didn't recommend. So that wasn't ever an issue or a problem with us. Everything was voted on, everything was approved based on the recommendations of the commission. Our budget also is approved within the Homelessness Commission budget and the Social Services budget, but year to year, the Homelessness Commission budget wasn't ever cut when we had administrations asking for a 3 to a 5% cut prior to this current administration. The Homelessness Commission did not have to experience that. Also, the Homelessness Commission utilized our internal service fees, meaning our computers, our rent, those things that are involved with ITS. They were involved, we covered that along with the commission. We also provided access to a human resources manager, to a chief financial officer, to benefits that they would have to either hire or pay someone for if they were standalone. So I know and I've heard that there's a lot of concern around the commission staying under social services as we move through this process, but there's a way to look at it. If you view the commission as a standalone, it comes with asking the administration to fund them as a standalone, which would result in additional service costs, additional administrative costs, the need for additional positions. And when I look at approximately how much that budget could probably be in addition to what they would need, it could go to upwards of about $500,000. So I think the question becomes, do we look at it as a standalone and make that recommendation, keeping in mind we do need those additional services and funding from the administration? Or if that funding exists, would it be better served to be on the street? And could we help more people that are homeless? So I think we just needed to understand that and the role we play. We always view the commission as a partner around encampment, around Section 8 issues, around the overflow shelter. Judy doesn't necessarily answer to my recommendations, but I agree with her recommendations as it relates to her being the director of the Homelessness Commission and the direction she sees the commission moving in. So, and that was also the working relationship I had with Will Connolly. So it's more of a partnership opposed to the commission appointing up to the Social Services Commission.
I have a question.
Yes,
ma'am. And I'm not, it's really clarification around governments and management. So you did pull yourself out of the talks about the management piece, but is the commission still willing to do the governance piece?
I think at this point we would be willing to do that. I don't want to speak for Judy in terms of what ideas she has around that, but I don't think we'd be able to.
But that option is not off the table, I guess. Okay. I just didn't know if that, when you said we're out, if you were completely out.
So that's a weird one. If you think about it, it's kind of a weird one because on one hand, the board is the board wherever it sits, right? And then, I'm going to say it and then we got to put it aside. The management, because the commission's still in. That's why it's kind of this wonky thing.
If it helps, the ordinance that established and continued the commission says the commission lives at MSS.
Regardless.
That is what the ordinance says.
Gotcha.
So to change that would take an ordinance change.
That's good, then we don't have to deal with it then, what I'm saying.
What's the value for social services to have the commission?
I think it's vital to the success of social services as well. We have a planning and coordination unit as well, and that's the unit that the commission grew out of. So to have that work, to plan that work within the city based on the role we play in the city, along with the fact that we also do planning and coordination around issues of poverty, putting out a community needs evaluation, things of that nature. Although we do other services, our primary role and function at this point in the direction we're moving in is more around homeless issues. 87% of the people that come to my door are seeking housing or related assistance.
So it's inextricably linked.
Yes.
So I think my question is there questions about that? Do we still need to consider this as a body?
I will say what I voiced this morning in our Homelessness Commission executive meeting is I think we should task ourselves as this group with coming up with feasible recommendations for moving forward to help the city end homelessness. At this point in time, I don't believe that trying to create a standalone commission, which then would entail a standalone Metro department, is a feasible option. So I would like to not waste our time on talking about a standalone commission, Department of Homeless Services, or whatever we may have been thinking we should do, because I don't believe it's a feasible option. Therefore, we'd be wasting our time, because if we all decided, hey, that's what we want to do, we could take it to the council, and the mayor's going to say, well, that's not happening, go back. We would be wasting our time, and I just don't think we should. Just my thoughts.
I mean, with that understanding, my thought is because Metro Social Service and Homelessness Commission and director is under the Metro Social Service umbrella, but in reality, it's more like a coexistence or collaborative function. So maybe my new idea is maybe we can create robust new homelessness commission with a COC or without COC, that will be, remain to be seen. But we can deconstruct and reconstruct homelessness commission itself. And if we want to combine with COC, the commission itself, who's going to sit on the commission will change. And then we can still collaborate with social service, and then we can clearly create a more holistic approach to prevent homelessness.
Well, and I also think that no matter what we end up doing here, either we're going to stay just as we are, or we're going to do something that's going to require an ordinance change.
Right.
Could an ordinance change be made and still be with MSS?
Yeah, sure.
And give the commission
Sure. I mean,
authority to
that could be,
act on?
we could recommend anything for an ordinance change. I just, what I think we're talking about at this point is either we stay exactly like we are with no changes to the ordinance whatsoever, we are what we are.
No, that's not what I'm saying at all.
No, I know.
Okay.
I know.
Okay.
Or we begin to figure out what we are going to be and what we want to be, and whatever that is, we end up making recommendations for a new ordinance based on what we decide this entity needs to be.
It was interesting earlier in the conversation, and I think that's what Darlene also said on the phone. I heard from somebody, maybe it was you, Judy, you said you don't even understand the level of authority and power you have because you have four council positions on the commission. That if you want to influence, it really is a very influential body if you use it that way. Which in my head, I hadn't really considered it that way, so I thought that was helpful. Okay, anybody who's still, can I go around the table? Okay, you can't vote because he's here. Do we still need to consider standalone? Okay, I'll go to you last. Do we still need to?
I think we should consider it. I mean, find out what we need to be before we decide not to consider it.
What else?
Does that make sense?
Yes, the thing is, for clarification, so we know, what else do we need to know that we don't know now?
Quite a bit, probably. I need to learn a lot.
Well, what is it that you need to know about whether or not a standalone commission is a feasible option? What do you need to know?
So I was under the impression that it'd have to be for this to work, but if ordinance can be changed where we can stay in MSS and be a body that can act on something and do more. And I mean, housing first, I agree, and housing is what needs to happen. But I also feel the commission needs to be doing something to help them while they're out there right now.
Okay, that's a different
to make
question.
their life easier. Well, that's, yeah.
That's a
But
different
can we do this?
I think whatever we end up doing, what the services or work that we take on is apart from where we exist and how we exist. So if we're going to exist as a standalone department commission,
But you got a
is
valid
that
point of
feasible,
what has to.
and should we consider it?
If the money was there, then maybe.
The only thing I'm going to keep saying, we had that conversation earlier. If you remember, the function of this commission is planning and coordinating. It's not around
Yeah,
services.
That's what it is now.
That's, my guess is, if you think about, unless it's a social service delivery, I mean, it is always going to be a planning and coordinating body. If we combine with COC, that is a planning and coordinating body. It's not a service delivery body. We could, as a larger body, help support initiatives. You know, again, we don't do those services. We help support those services through education and knowledge.
But we could support them, though.
And help to fundraise for them. But I just want to make that thing clear, is that we're not, unless I'm going totally, I'm off, we're not moving this into a direct service organization. It's not. It's a planning and coordinating body. So that's where your questions, I'm not trying to talk you down off it. I'm trying to get your questions because I think they're helpful for us to continue to look at what's the best entity for the city.
Well, I think we need to move on finding out what the commission needs to be, where we need to be to do what we need to do with the COC. So I don't think we should just take it off the table yet.
Okay, so then my last question would be, is that'll work for this, this is the thing that was helpful to me. It doesn't matter where it sits, it still needs this. It doesn't matter where it sits, it still needs this. This is the community board.
Thank you.
Hi, Daryl.
Hi, Daryl.
Hello. Hello.
Glad
What is
you-
this meeting I'm in?
This is the governance work group. COC,
Okay.
MAC governance work group.
You know, we were here. We're all here. It was from 9:30 to 12:30.
Okay, well, my bad. I had it, I thought it was a conference call, and so that's my fault. So.
Okay. If you need to get off, we understand. What we're talking about is the whole thing around a standalone commission with common boards. My only question for us as a group is, I think my question is, can we put this aside to look at the governance portion of that and go back to that at some point later? Last time we met, the answer I got was no, we can't do it. And so that's why we're having this conversation. So we continue,
Okay.
so we can continue to look at what it requires. Do you know? To be a standalone? Do you know, like, financially?
I can't give you direct numbers, but I would absolutely agree with what Renee said. Generally, the standalone department would not rely on another department to provide all those ancillary services like finance and HR and those kind of things. We do have a central HR department, so some of our smaller boards and commissions do, work with them and go back and forth with them. But once it gets to more than a couple of staff members, that gets too much for the HR to just provide all of that. So you need an independent person. So really it's just an increase in, it's almost a duplication of these ancillary services that you just need to operate within a government structure.
Yeah.
I mean, that's all quantifiable.
Right, it is.
Renee, I'm married to a department head, so I asked her a rough question. She identifies 3 out of their 10 staff is what it takes to run their department. And about $100,000 in internal service fees for the Arts Commission, which is similarly sized.
Yeah.
Maybe a little bigger. That's anecdotal.
Okay. Other input? See, my guess is move towards, if we end up moving towards this combined thing, your concerns about really helping people who are in that condition get better addressed through that than the conversation of a standalone versus a not standalone. Because you need to have everybody at the table to figure out what we need, where are the gaps, where are people falling through the cracks, how do we help get them? So, but we can keep looking at information.
All right.
Okay.
So,
Where are other people around the table? Rachel?
I don't see any benefit to having a standalone body.
Because?
I think I agree, duplicating services. I think we should leverage what we have at the table and use the resources to get the jobs done.
Eric?
Sitting in both places, COC and Commission, I think our prioritized needs for resources and funding of staff are the most immediate needs are on the COC, are on HMIS, system coordination across the board, because I get to see both parts of the house. That's where the emergent need is, not on the expenses and staff it takes to run a department.
Mina?
I agree. Most important thing is COC portion, just governing structure. It doesn't matter where it housed, as long as we do have governing structure, so we can be flexible where it's going to sit.
And I agree, there's just no need to incur the expense of a standalone commission.
Semi-basic.
Renee? How about Daryl? Daryl, thank you. Hey, Daryl, what are your thoughts?
I heard, I guess when Cloud first came the first time, I heard their recommendation that was, what's to say, best practices. But I think in our situation, if we can leverage what we got without, and keep it, everybody has a seat at the table, then, we'll figure out how to make it work.
And I think we need to keep in mind that no matter where it is or where it sits, you still have to answer to someone, to a commission, to a board. There still has to be a vote. And if there's concern around, there's been issues with the Social Services Commission agreeing with the Homelessness Commission, then I'd raise those questions. But since historically that hasn't happened, I don't see that as an issue.
And actually, and I was saying too, we'd lose a lot if we did.
Yeah.
So, all right. I should put that on hold until we find out where.
Okay. Is there, I know I love the fact that Charlotte's going to be joining our board. Have we ever talked about modifying Social Service Commission to have the representative from the Homeless Commission on that board?
We haven't in the past, and I'd have to go back and look at our bylaws because the mayor does appoint by commission, so I would have to go back and look at that.
I think that would be a great idea, actually. That could be something that would be feasible. If someone from this commission could be appointed by the mayor to serve on your commission, it would fill one of your slots, then that'd be appropriate.
We would have our governance committee, and that person could serve on that committee, which would probably be easier than trying to get an additional position onto the board.
And I think what we may do is if we come back and we do have some, then I think maybe we want to look at that relationship as well.
And the Social Services Commission is by charter, and it has 7 members by charter, so it would require a charter change to add, although you could replace a member with
And that's what I was wondering, if there would be a member that someone from this board would qualify for in terms of slotted members for that.
And the charter doesn't have qualifications for the Social Services Commission, so it doesn't have to have a, physician or whoever else on that board.
Okay, we're going to put that one aside. And I'll take these. Sorry, I'm one thing. It takes me a little longer. I have these written down because do you remember last time we had a conversation about what needs to be in whatever model we have, what needs to be in place. And so as we're looking at the pros and cons and as we keep building, these are the things that I think we need to take into consideration. We can always add to them. So a level of accountability, right? And my take was both for the body itself, but also for people that engage with the body, accountability. Decision makers at the table, going from service-focused to people-focused, a mindset, relational, we talked a lot about people, represents the community. And this is why I keep asking, even with Cloudburst, what they mean by community. And maybe it represents the communities. I don't know. What do y'all, when you hear community, what does it say to you?
I think in the context of the COC discussion, it's all about that big, huge community. So yes, it's service providers, but it's also business people. And I think that's what Cloudburst has been hammering home since they got here, is we are to this. Like, we need to get way, way big. So to me, it's that very, very big community.
Is that a shared view?
Yeah, when I hear community, I hear anyone who's touched by the issue of homelessness, whether it's a person experiencing homelessness, currently, formerly, whether it's service providers who are working hard to try to end homelessness, whether it's business people who can, figure out a way to partner with those service providers in order to provide housing for people. I think it's all of it. Yeah, all of it.
Yes? Okay. It has the ability to implement a clear strategy. So we have to have a body that can say, here's what we need to do and here's how we're going to do that. It needs to have a clear identity so people understand that's what that thing does, right? It operates out of an empowerment approach. What does that mean to you?
More than being just informed. Actually being able to make decisions and feel like they're moving the ball.
Others? What does an empowerment approach mean?
I heard what she said, the ability to, and the power to act.
Yes?
But I think it's also that not that the board or whatever it's basically called, makes decisions. Like, we don't make the decisions, we lay the groundwork so that agencies in the community can come up with their own solutions that they know will work best. But so it's not mandates down to you all, it's gathering information, gathering resources, having that strategic goal, but then empowering the workers, the people doing the direct work, to then take action that's best for the community.
Do you agree?
That's good.
Yeah, I came at it from the other side. More like when I go to commission meetings, if everybody's sitting representatives sitting at the table, they're just being informed. Those meetings don't move forward.
And I think that's the frustration with the community, with the commission, is you can meet all day long, but unless you...
But it would keep people at the table.
But unless you can then, give the power back to the people to take action, you're just kind of meeting.
So the difference would be at a commission meeting, I mean, like, if we were operating out of that now, what are you all going to do differently as a result of being here? Whose responsibility is that? Is that what you're talking about?
Yeah. Well, whose responsibility is that? And here's what... It's not just a committee report for everybody. It's, okay, we need to move that. What do we need to make that happen if we all agree that that needs to happen?
So can I put action in parentheses? Is that what I'm hearing? Okay.
And recognizing you have that power.
Yeah.
Yeah. I think that.
A clear, lasting structure. Let's build it so that we're not redesigning it 2 years from now, building it so it may adjust, but that it's good. Those were the things. Are we missing anything? Or what are we missing? Yeah.
Transparency.
Okay, what does transparency mean to you? I won't do this a lot, I promise, but this is one of those words. What does transparency mean?
I think it's just allowing every stakeholder to understand what's happening, what you're doing, and how it's being done.
You want to add to it?
If you're operating out of an empowerment model where you're asking people to take responsibility and take action, then they need an understanding of what structure they're operating in and what's being asked of them. So that's a piece of transparency that's also probably education, because there are some things we have that we're operating within systems. HUD, city, nonprofit, boards, etc.
What did you say?
Understanding, which is
Understanding,
education.
educate, yeah.
You said clarity.
And clarity, yes.
It's one of those words we kick around a lot, and sometimes it means nothing when you use it too much. So it's like for us to understand in this construct what it means. Yeah.
To me, it's information is accessible to whomever interested, whomever want to learn how to reach to those decision making and so forth. So availability of information.
And along with that information, that everyone's voice is heard. There's not just a select few speaking for the group.
Yes. What's he doing?
Good? Because again, we want to go through the two models then and look at kind of pros and cons. I think we talked about that. But I also always want to make sure, how are those models meeting these needs?
And I think the other need that we should put up there, just based on our earlier conversation about the funding issue, is, this has really got to be a group that's about capacity building, right? So it's not just maintaining the status quo in terms of services or in terms of funding, but this is really about building the capacity of everybody in our city so that we can increase our response to the needs of homes.
That's well worded.
Very well said. Very well said.
And I think that's how you're going to get more buy-in. Like, if we're really focused on, we don't just promise to be transparent, we don't just promise to, represent the community, but we really are going to be so focused on building the capacity of all the players at the table.
Going once? Going twice? It may be in our conversation something else comes up that we want to add, but those are the things. that my guess is whenever we recommendations, we also need to frame the recommendations in this. This is how we see that operating. So, if you'll go into your minutes from last time, because that's what we'll work from, and it's on, sorry, page 7 starts with the two models. The first one was the relational model, where we still kept the two entities separate with somehow of a stronger connection. I'm going to read out loud so we can all hear it at the same time, and then come back and have a discussion about how this looks. So the commission would have an advocate focus, would provide communication and education to the community, would set the city's agenda. The decision makers would be business leaders, political leaders, faith community leaders, city departments. It would fundraise in accordance with a strategic plan. It would create an annual report card. It would convene provider groups. It would have committees, fundraising, communication, etc. Look who's here! Woo!
That's what all that.
Thank you.
Hey, it was on my calendar.
That's awesome.
I thought it was all a call-in things.
So Daryl, did you hear we took the department thing off the table for now? The standalone commission and combined boards, we just took that off the table for now, the conversation. Okay. That may have been on your drive over.
Are there extra handouts at that seat?
Here's an extra.
Thank you. I can't show you.
And I'm on page 7.
Just taking it off for now.
So no merger for right now.
No.
Right now.
The standalone department.
These are, we're still.
Which would have a standalone, like, what do you call it? Department.
Department.
We're still.
Like a
Creating a new
Department of Homeless
department.
Services.
We're still considering
Yeah.
combined.
So I just read through the first one around with in the relational model, actually the Daryl, the one you and I worked on, and Catherine, weren't you? Who else was on that one? We were over here.
Oh yeah, you're on that one.
Yeah, okay. So that was the commission role. The COC role would be HUD compliance. Decision makers could be real estate reps from the commission, service provider leaders to city departmental frontline staff and advocates. It would have seats on the MHC and would report to the MHC. It could act as a committee. Shared responsibilities would be shared membership, shared data, shared politics. It would convene planning, public awareness, accountability, and could fundraise. That's what we got. The principle of the relational model was to keep the COC focused on the NOFA and HUD requirements, while the MHC became the larger umbrella organization that focuses on the community strategy to end homelessness. You get a handle on it? Two entities that probably look like this.
Can I ask a question?
Yeah.
It's a legal question, I think. Can the homelessness commission, as we're currently formed, can we do fundraising?
Yes.
So, the existing structure would allow us to do, but I'm going to thank you. So, what are the benefits to this approach? That's interesting. Should I flip to the next question? I'll come back to benefits. What are the dangers to this approach?
I feel like that just kind of gives us more of the same of what we have now, and I think that those you can lay out roles and responsibilities, but I think we're still going to end up with that commission role advocating and whatnot, but no real action or movement. And so I think it's just too disjointed, and it doesn't get us moving in a forward direction.
I would agree. I think that what I've begun to understand is that while I think the commission's role has been and should be a lot of these things that we listed here, the problem is that I'm not sure that the COC has the capacity actually to then carry out some of the things. I've thought of the MHC as more the policy building, here's how it should be done, here's what needs to be done, here's the policy that the city is going to set forth in terms of addressing homelessness. Now the COC needs to go out and make things happen. And that's not what's been happening, so I think if we continue to keep it separate, then therein lies the danger, is that we do what we do. We continue to talk about policy. We think about how the city is going to address homelessness, but we don't do it because we can't. It's not our role. It's not what we're supposed to be doing. And we would continue that and hope that the COC, with its new governance structure, is going to step up and actually be able to do things, but there is no guarantee that that will happen.
Are there dangers?
Can we go back to positive?
Yeah, I was going to go there.
Yeah.
Benefits.
I think the benefit would be is that if we kept it separate like this, and the new COC governance board really stepped up and became the leadership body that it should be and could be in terms of actually carrying out and doing things, then it could work well. You have one entity that is the policy setting entity that guides what we do in our community, and another that takes that and distributes funding, makes those decisions, sets those priorities, and works with agencies to go out and do the things that need to be done. It could work well. Emphasis on could.
Dangers, benefits?
When I came in, were y'all talking about the need to broaden fundraising beyond just the HUD dollars within the COC? I think a danger of continuing continuing the separation is you've got dollars right now that are going into, got local dollars that are heavily in one of the two places. And I'm not sure the COC ever eventually sees, if we want to look, I know we're looking at it as a whole system, but like if you're two different bodies, I'm not sure the COC ever sees those dollars in a way, we do it now. We fund some of the HMIS projects. We are doing some of it, but I'm not sure you're maximizing those local dollars from both perspectives.
And correct me if I'm wrong, but doesn't the commission now actually have staff that does services, outreach, and isn't that part of the commission staff?
It's filling gaps. Yes.
Because we're filling some gaps.
Yes.
Is that what we're supposed to be doing?
No.
Exactly. We're not supposed to be a service provider. That money should be funding
service providers.
Yeah, exactly. So clearly there's been some issue with it being separate before because the commissions come in and say, well, that's not really being done, so we have to do it. And that's not really what we were created to do. I don't think we were ever created to be a service provider.
Just think about so the one that you keep talking about is this model really requires clear infrastructure. It really requires some tightened infrastructure. It might require using, if we looked at the existing commission staff to staff the COC, there has to be something that would connect it together, otherwise it would. And the danger is, one of the dangers that also I think I'm struck by is how we wear out service providers with coming to, like, how many hours have you spent in, like,
can't talk about it.
Daryl?
I'm afraid about it.
How many hours are you in meetings?
Well, I just know this is the hardest funding to go out after because it takes up more time than anything else.
Well, it's not going to bring people to the table who aren't getting any benefit out of it.
Yeah,
for sure.
And I think that's the problem if you leave them separate and you have the CSC focus on that head thing. We're not doing what Cloudburst is telling us, which is to bring new players to the table.
Correct.
CSC is focused on head. I've never gotten a head dollar in my life, but I still go. But you're not going to get any new players at the table if that remains focused.
And you really got to figure out, you got to sell the benefits. Why should I come to this table? I mean, we all say, in homelessness, okay, we all kind of have that same agenda. Well, why do I have to be at that table to make that happen? I'm doing my service, and it is sometimes hard to get back and say, okay, I want to be the guy in the town who does this or that, and I'm filling this gap, and you guys can help me do that, and I know in a better way I can leverage that. if the agencies who are not participating understood how this data is going to help them, and we're saying we can't even get the data out to know how to help us. So we have to create a benefits list. This is why you should participate, and it's a little fuzzy.
I think this relational model, this relational model also doesn't take into account, like if we say we need to educate and all that, that there's also a third body that now is going to feel like they're going to need to continue to fill a gap, which is the coalition. Coalition. And so I think we all won't be on the same page.
I'm not making, we don't get to make a decision yet. I'm just going to tell you that. We don't get to do it because we need to hear the combined model and then go back. And I know you're taking great notes, and that's why this was not, I didn't want to make a debit and check, a debit and credit list that doesn't, it's not like which is bigger, we don't look at that. I think we look at where our will is.
And this understand, this relational model is talking about here, it talks about an annual report card. I'm not sure what exactly that is other than, there's these performance outcomes, there's this rating thing that goes on.
Actually, I think that was me, and a report card would be from the city. How are we doing? How are we moving these things ahead? How do we help everybody understand kind of where we are as a city? That kind of global report card rather than how are we working with the HUD dollars. Because I think that was under, the
relational.
CSC, wasn't it?
Yeah, because I think that's one of the, concerns that I've heard that, those people getting the HUD dollars, they get evaluated this way, and then other people don't get evaluated at all, and it's like, well, we're under the gun, we don't really know what's the report card, what's the scorecard for this pool. So that was a concern too. So if everybody kind of has a general sense of what they're being evaluated on, then we could determine if we're moving the needle or not.
Catherine made me think of a pragmatic consideration with the governance charter now beefed up and the COC seeking a more broad, active set of leaders in its board. Recruitment, having just gone through this process, recruitment for that board, while the commission is also out there, is difficult. People don't understand which one is which. They don't know which one they should be on. They're like, I don't know which one's more prestigious, but that is a real world consideration when we're recruiting people outside of our homeless sphere of influence.
So we're going to the next one?
Well, one other little thought. Sometimes when you do recruit people who are kind of outside that sphere of day-to-day working with homelessness, whether it's a businessman or whatever, they touch the community and they can have a platform you were talking about earlier.
Absolutely.
But to come sit in a meeting, they're lost.
That's right.
They're just lost. Like, what are y'all talking about? So you get them on there. You get them on there. And it's like, how much have you got to bring them up to speed before they really get a better understanding of what so that
there's
they
not
can
a unified strategy.
So that they can serve, because they're serving from a strength place where they understand the issue versus just, I can help. And tell me what to do and I'll do that piece. So that's the concern about bringing people in who don't have a deep understanding, or maybe they don't have to have it. Maybe they're just.
So there's a great continuum that goes unaware, aware, understand, believe, act. Unaware, aware, understand, believe, act. We always want people to come in and move to action. That's what we want. It all depends on where they are in the continuum. So you think about no matter what we do, we have to create those ways, because how you move somebody from unaware to aware is different than from aware to understand. Do you want me to write that down again for you?
Yeah, one more time.
Unaware.
Contemplation.
Unaware, aware, understand, believe, act.
Got it.
And even as we keep moving ahead, no matter what body we're on, that's what we've been doing this whole time. If you think about it as moving ourselves even through this to where we can get to action. Because you cannot act. Even if you're here, that's where we want to act, and that's where we get into trouble.
Can I say one more, I think, pitfall that we run into when we're talking about, people on bringing in people from all communities to either of these places, is that these bodies, that the Homelessness Commission, the COC, they're working bodies in a different way than some other commissions. Maybe when the mayor's appointing people to other commissions, they have their meetings, they act in the meetings, but we have things that we need to be aware of and doing beyond just sitting in the meeting. Who has the time and the dedication and the commitment to be part of that? And and I'm not sure the current ordinance that outlines who's supposed to be on the Homelessness Commission actually takes that into consideration. Are all those folks who are appointed because they're supposed to be appointed because of the ordinance, do they understand that it's more of a working body than it is just to come show up once a month?
Well, I think that gets into a whole other conversation.
I know. That's just what I'm saying.
So most of them don't.
Yeah, I think that's a whole other conversation. I mean, from the commission is what is the role of the board and the staff?
Right, but I think as we're developing the governance board, we have to take into consideration what is the role.
Right.
It's a long way to say that, but yes.
I do think there's a description of what the board's role is, and how it does differentiate itself, if it does, from the other boards and commissions is thoughtful and smart, because I don't think, it's not really treated differently in the selection process for the most part, from the other boards and commissions, because we have to kind of look at them all somewhat equally. So, but I do think sitting in the mayor's office, I think we do rely on the department / the team, commission, et cetera, to offer guidance to what that role is going to be once you're appointed.
And some of them, maybe if there was a unified, they would be more engaged. If there was a unified strategy.
So let's go to the blended. What do you say? Thank you for that segue. Shall I read your words, or somebody want to read it from that group?
We had a lot of questions, mostly.
So the blended model was oversight of federal, state, and local funding and scoring, oversight grants directly to new entity, oversight of data management, guidance for needed policy, power and authority to act on behalf of community, leadership of leveraged resources, identify bench strategy gaps, conductor services to meet service gaps, unified vision, ordinance will identify accountability. So let's kind of look at those things again, because I think this may be where we even talk about how we see this blended model coming out. What are the benefits?
You can direct resources to what you think is the most important thing that everybody agrees on.
What else?
If nothing changed with our collaborative applicant, you'd have leveraged staffing model.
Even if it did change with the collaborative applicant, you'd still have a staffing model for the board itself.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah, I don't know how that works out afterwards.
I think this blended model hits all those points.
Does it? I wonder. Dangers.
I think anytime you start talking about funding, people get real protective. And if you're talking about giving oversight to another body where you've spent time courting relationships with local foundations, with the other, even state people, and you've done that, now you're saying, you feel like, I don't have that direct line anymore. I got to now court this relationship with somebody else. So
No.
Okay.
No, be careful about this one.
Okay, well
this
then,
is that thing. This is not okay, now we're moving it. It's like, it seems to me that if we do a blended model, you're going to funders to figure out how to leverage funding in a way that serves more. You can't go compete with your agencies for the same kind of funding. That won't work.
Funding comes from different sources.
Right.
I guess what I'm feeling like is, I think the local foundations, and maybe I'm wrong, I think we're working at capacity. It's not like they're holding back some funds that they're not releasing into the community. Maybe I'm wrong, but do they then get put in a position to, we've got X amount of dollars to spend, so we're going to shave some off here, off over here?
I have one example.
Yeah.
I have one example where I think we as a collection of entities could be better positioned, and that's the collective impact work that's happening that they've added at with C&M Baptist. That new position and work, I think we're just on the cusp of being positioned for funding, and all that is new dollars, as far as I know.
I don't think we're talking about local funding, Daryl, as in terms of taking away local funding to individual organizations, as much as we're talking about a bigger picture, national funding. You know, are there national organizations out there that would fund things here that we're doing that would be new initiatives and things that would bring us to that different level? I don't think we're talking about this new entity going to the community foundation and say, now give us all your money and then we'll dole it out. I don't think that's what we're talking about.
Well, I think that's probably that needs to be cleared, stated, because, people have their, funding streams now that they already have. And if you're saying, we're not going to touch any of those things, we're trying to find something else that's one thing. But right here, it says oversight of federal, state, local funding. So when I think federal, state, local funding, I've got all those sources. And now you're talking about oversight of those fundings. What does that, how does that impact?
Like Robert Wood Johnson, you're not going to get as small as your agency is, but as a collective impact, our city could bring some new dollars in and really create something amazing.
But there's also, I see this more as governmental funding, federal funds, state funds, local city funds. Those things could filter through.
So should we put government funding instead of?
Yeah, I don't necessarily think of that as small non-profit foundation funding.
And I wonder if we'd want to add, and we don't have to get to quite wordsmithing, but there's probably an word to add before oversight. Could be securing or something. Yeah. But your point is, I think your point's well made.
That needs to be explained, because I think these development directors are out there working it really hard, and therefore now I'm working against the community. That we need to make sure that's not the scenario that gets set up.
My guess is if we decide to move to a blended model and that body comes into play, and you start having, I think then it's time to go have the conversations with the local funders, even as a group. They all meet together and really talk about what we're needing. If you really had a plan in place, we really looked at that gaps in that data, then we would be able to say, hey, here's what we need. And this body becomes a flow-through place for those funds to go to.
I have talked to an element of the funders. I don't know if it's everybody. And they expressed confusion and kind of dismay about our current situation. But their ideas and goals were in no way, we need to know who to fund and who not to fund, because that's what we're trying to decide. It was, we feel like we're funding and we don't know where the collective leadership of the city, collective, meaning the whole movement, is headed. So that was the feedback I got, was they're thrilled we're doing this process. But it was in no way like, tell us how we can pick winners and losers. They're not going to, they don't want to do that. Exactly. Yeah. They have their own structures and strategies.
And they want autonomy.
But they do want to feel like they're funding into a continuum.
And I think maybe when we cut you off earlier, like the other discussion we had, is that like the way I see this is, things like transitional housing or things that are no longer a HUD priority, this group would come together and say, okay, these are the programs that fit perfectly within HUD, so we want all this HUD money to go to them so we can get it all. But then we have these 5-6 agencies that we need to help agency directors who come up with, okay, so where can you get that other funding? Not, and Paula talked a lot about, because we still need that continuum of services. We don't need all HUD-funded, HUD-air definition of services. We need a whole array. And I do think we've got to clearly message that that's what this group is about, back into that capacity building. Because this is not talking about getting control over all the money and then deciding who gets funded. It's about how do we strategically use the HUD money for the people that's appropriate for, but then look at those gaps that are still remaining, and how do we then help agencies identify or foundations decide, okay, well now I'm gonna launch a new initiative and I'm gonna fund this because it's not they can't get their money through HUD.
One of the things that has happened previously that has brought us to this point, and what we want to fix and not do anymore, is that our continuum of care, which used to be called the GAPS group, because we were looking, HUD said you had to look at what your gaps and services are, so you had to get everybody in the room and say, well, what are you not doing? That became our continuum of care, because HUD then said you had to have a continuum of care. I think what happened many times is that as those funding priorities begin to change and agencies begin to not be funded anymore, and I'll use the old supportive services only model, because that's the funding that I got. And when we stopped getting supportive services only funding, we didn't go to the meetings anymore because we weren't getting funded.
So then you were really a gap.
Yeah,
You weren't even in the
because it didn't apply to us.
Yep.
That's what we do not want to see happen. We want to clearly say, whatever it is that we're doing, we need to make sure that we're creating a real continuum. HUD may only fund this part of who's part of this continuum, but the continuum has to incorporate everyone, and we as a body somehow need to figure out how we make sure that everyone's getting the funds they need to provide the services they're needing, because your organization is vital to our continuum of care, whether or not HUD funds you or not. Is not the question. We need you at the table, because without you, we're missing.
Can I just clarify for a second? Just to make sure while we're on this topic, I think part of the continuum of care governing bodies obligation is to prioritize HUD funding. And so while we all want everybody to have as much funding as we can get, there will be those difficult decisions, because HUD just doesn't say this person gets this money. It's part of the process to determine that, which this governing body would be participating in. So all the voices should be there, and we should all do that, but there are those difficult decisions, and there are going to be people who don't get the money that they want.
And we make those difficult decisions now, but we do it poorly, and we abandon programs just because, oh, whoops, it doesn't fit the HUD mission and affects our school.
Well, we don't have any other capacity to do that.
That's right.
Right now, the only thing that the continuum of care is really doing is those funding priorities. So if you're not part of that, well, then you get left out.
That's right.
That's what we're saying, is we don't want to do that anymore. Because HUD actually says, okay, this is what we're going to do, and this is all we're going to fund, but we still want you to have those other people involved. We haven't figured out how to keep those other people involved when we're not funding them.
That's right.
So, as the continuum of care. So we got to figure out how to do that.
But those of you with the commission need to understand, you are going to join our mean club, the club that makes hard decisions. I mean, if this happens, we are the meanies.
Well, but if we had the funds to fund everybody else, then we wouldn't have to make that.
But the other thing, alongside of that, it's also then the group that really helps to convene the community around a shared vision for the future. So I think there's a piece of all of a sudden when you have a context around to make those decisions, it's a whole lot different than just being a mean group.
I have heard basically Daryl say those exact same thing, that same thing the last 2 years as we've gone through our process.
I mean, if we can get that.
But not being able to help him.
Right, exactly. I mean, not having the capacity to do capacity building or
so some of the things that have happened offline is, because, okay, you can't play in this kiddie pool anymore, go find your own kiddie pool. You didn't have a pool to send us to, so we found our own. Of course you did. And then the collective, we were other recovery. Now all our development officers meet together, what funds are out there. So we're doing this by necessity, not because, it's still part of, it's happening in the community. And we were kind of forced into that position. But if we can take that and raise that up to this level and say, how are you going to help us fill that gap now?
That should be a subcommittee of the continuum of care. I mean, it should be part of what we do.
And really, I kind of see the NOFA process being a standalone committee. It doesn't have to get dragged down to everybody else, because it was taken down into swirl.
So here's something that I will say. This is why I'm beginning to drink the Kool-Aid. I know, Eric. So
lunar eclipse.
I know whatever it is, craziness. If we're going to do that, then we have to have a way to do that. I mean, right now the continuum of care is a bunch of volunteers that come from agencies that are funded or not, whatever. But they're a bunch of volunteers. They can't do that. Who's going to do it?
Who's going to do what?
Pull people together, like you said, those development directors that are meeting. How are they going to become a subcommittee?
So I'm going to take this from a governance perspective. I want you to, and I'm going to put collaborative, and what you think about it from a governance perspective. Who would pull that together?
But that has to be part of whatever structure that we're creating as a blended model. Right. So if we're pulling this governance team together, we're going to put these together as a blended model. Again, I'm starting to go into details. What's that going to look like? Who's going to staff it? How's it going to be created? And what are we going to do? How are we going to make it happen?
If you go to a blended model, you already have a staff in place. I want you to pay attention to that. Not that you just delegate it all over to the paid staff. There will be roles, but if you start thinking about it, what is it? I'm making all this stuff up. Do you offer the development symposium twice a year so people in development get to come together? There's ways of doing this that connects it all. The thing that we have, the benefit in the city by blending these two is you already have a staffing model in place to help support it. What it does is give your staff the focus they need to go carry out the vision or the will. All right, dangers in this model.
I think one of the biggest dangers that I've kind of heard in talking with people outside of this group is the feeling that the other stakeholders have in not having their voice heard. In just coming up with a brand new governance charter for COC, and now we're talking about changing it again. And that was a painstaking process. And making sure that all those people who had a voice in making that happen continue to feel like they still have a voice in what's going to happen. And does that mean that the mayor is going to have all power in deciding who is on? Those are the fears that I think are coming up. And the danger that we have in blending this model is how do we answer and address those fears and get people on board, and to believe that maybe this is the best way to move the city forward. If that's what we believe. And how are we going to allay those fears? How are we going to make sure that we do have input from all the stakeholders and places that we need to have them from to make this blended model work?
And what kind of, when you're talking about the different community stakeholders, what's the input and information that we need to have from them to make this model work?
That's a good question. I'm not sure I know the answer to it.
Well, what I can say from the COC side is even though we're representative of a small community of basically all service providers, they still didn't feel heard. And so
the service providers
are still saying, we need our voices heard, we need our voice. I mean, so I'm thinking, I don't know how to articulate this very well, but it goes back to being very, and you said it earlier, somebody did, making sure that along every step we allow people to know how are advocates and persons with lived experiences getting plugged in. Like you said that, I'm like, oh yeah, because we always think it, but I think people are wondering, well, you haven't said how.
So I know in COC governance, I know in the Homelessness Commission, we have slotted appointments, it's for people with lived experience. How do we find, and so from our perspective, that means we're trying to get that input, yet at every turn we're being told that we don't get that input. I know. How do you fix that?
I don't know.
And
I think advocates, and I'm doing advocates / service providers. Because if you put several service providers on there's somebody with a niche who's like, wait, we're not on the table. And then there's somebody else with another niche. And then how do we make everybody feel heard?
Why wouldn't we, in a blended model that was robust enough, that anybody who wanted to participate would have a role in that model? In other words, because of the way you devised your charter, you have committees, you have those things operating. Why wouldn't there be a place for everybody to have a voice?
So there is the continuum of care itself, which exists by virtue of federal law, which is all those members that would come up. And then you have and I think the danger that you're kind of referring to, balancing so that you can have effective decision making. If you have a 50-person body, effective decision making is very difficult. And so, the balance between, okay, this is a decision for everybody and everybody needs to have a discussion about it versus your governing board, or even your executive committee of the governing board, however you want to structure that. I think that's, so one, part of it exists already in that you need a general meeting of the entire continuum of care on a regular basis, but two, when you're developing this board, doing it in a way that either has the rules or the limited membership that would allow for effective decision making.
So I have a question.
Yeah, I'm talking more about in the whole entity, it's almost like any membership organization, right?
So
not just the governance.
When you're talking about organization structures, a nonprofit has articles of incorporation bylaws that give them their corporate authority. Governmental entities have statutory authority. What authority and where does the continuum of care get the authority?
Federal law.
Federal law says you have to have one, but what authority does it give it?
Well, it gives it the authority to control federal funding.
Only, but
make
we're not talking about-
recommendations for federal funding.
Right.
Because HUD actually decides who gets the money.
Right.
So it really doesn't have any authority. It's required by federal law.
It has influence.
It has influence. It doesn't have authority. So. Now you're laughing.
No, we went right down this path.
Well, this is from the
It's a great
social
question.
teaches
It's a great question.
organizational analysis. How do we then create an entity that has some corporate authority? That we have. Do we have articles of incorporation? Do we have statutory authority? Can we? And this is not really a question. This is rhetorical. Do we create?
Gotcha.
Do we propose an ordinance that we get our government to pass that then gives us authority?
Well, I guess the question is, what authority are you looking for?
That's a good
Right?
question.
Because as I was trying to really think through some of these really difficult structural questions, the organization that kept coming back to my mind was Ryan White. And the Federal Funding Planning Council of Ryan White is by federal regulation, and it goes through and it has a lot of those same impacts. That's staffed by our health department. And we help in the putting members on there. There's a defined process. How you recruit, there's a defined process. How you select, how you appoint, defined process, all of those things. And in roles, they have defined processes for committees and those kind of things. So
I was chairing that board at one point.
this really strikes me as something that could be similar, particularly when you're talking about it being housed within social services.
The only difference in Ryan White and the Part A Planning Council and what we're talking about here is that the Part A Planning Council for our local community actually does make the funding decisions, as opposed to we make recommendations to HUD and HUD still decides whether or not.
Just for the HUD, right now for the HUD funding.
Right. So I mean, yeah, but structurally, yes, then maybe that's something that we should.
And there is the down the road possibility of the central. I mean, not to get us too confused, but HUD has made an option available that some communities have gotten where they do actually make the funding. It's this unified funding agency concept, but we are.
But if we're also talking about creating a structure that may have some ability to take city funds or state funds and
absolutely
and make a decision on where those goes, then it would be more by the planning council.
Right, or the Barnes Fund model is the other one.
And I think the key is the ability. I think that as we construct this, we want to be careful not to sell people what we can't sell yet, right?
true.
But it's saying that this is what that body would look like. So I'm going to kind of come.
So that's the authority.
Can I also keep going back in my mind about when we talk about people being plugged in. Plugged in is different than voices heard and having authority. And I think that's where we get really caught in the weeds. It's like, who's in charge of that? Who's making that decision? When really, if we equip people well, they can all plug in the room or out of the room, I guess.
So a couple of things. So we're talking about a new charter, right? I mean, you just went through this whole governance
amended.
Yeah, charter. So you would make another charter, right? Is there any reason the one that just got created, is it not big enough to do this?
We just have to go through it and see. I mean, I think
There's definitely some places in terms of if you talk about blending the Homelessness Commission with the COC. Currently, the mayor appoints people to the Homelessness Commission. The COC has a particular process for appointing people to their governance board.
Yeah.
Those two things would, through changes in those bylaws, would have to be merged into a working structure. So yes, there would have to be changes.
But we decided. It was a hard call, but decided we had enough work to do on our governance charter as it existed to make sure this NOFA saw the benefits of those improvements, that we couldn't wait for this dialogue and process. So we jammed it through. But I think, and had participation and all that. I don't mean we jammed it through, but we got it done, exactly. I at least throughout, and I don't know if people heard this or not, but continued to express that we potentially could come back and amend it in this process.
So what you're saying is expand that charter and that work that's already been done to include some of these ideas instead of scrapping that one and starting a new one.
Right. All I think we're saying is, I know to make any of these changes effective, two things have to happen, I think, depending on what the changes are. But as it's conceptualized, One is that COC has to amend its governance charter. Seems pretty like that's going to happen. And the second one is the commission is governed by an ordinance, and that has to be amended or rewritten or et cetera also. Those are the two things that have to happen, which to me is, I mean, on the COC side is where I say, you know, they're, even if they're not plugged in or, you know, not fully participating or whatever, there is a vote. I mean, that part will have to be voted on eventually. So.
Right, because that's the other thing that we need to make sure that we recognize. We can do all the work in the world that we want to do on this.
Absolutely.
We can come up with every single detail proposal that we think is the best proposal in the world, but the voting members of the COC could look at what we do and say, no, we're not.
Absolutely.
So that's why I think we have to keep in conversation as we go through this process.
Yeah.
And it may be the first to say, if this is, so, is there a recommendation to move ahead versus the relational model versus the blended model?
You know, and this is going to sound strange coming from me, but I think that we should go ahead with trying to create a blended model and not look at trying to keep these entities separate.
Can I go around the table again? You know, that group, actually I almost was going to make you write it down. Everybody holds it up so you can kind of see, because we get into a group think around some of this, and I'll keep saying that, is that when you hear a lone voice, listen to them, because they usually have some good information to take into consideration. So, but we can go around the table really quick. Blended.
I don't know, I probably should have some more steady. I mean, I see the benefits of putting the things together. It's just what it's going to look like. That's the question.
We can, okay.
Blended, we need to act bold now.
Blended, I like exactly how
Blended.
Carol said it.
Blended?
Yeah.
I think we're moving ahead on a model to design to offer up. Let's get to our next piece of work. Made that decision. So today, I know we have only about 15 minutes left, and what I'm hearing is well, first of all, as y'all are talking, I keep coming back through your charter. Thank you for doing this work. The mission of the COC is to create a collaborative, inclusive, community-based, inspired process and approach to planning and managing effective homeless assistance resources and programs by which federal, state, and local funding resources be actualized to adequately fund all homeless assistance needs to end homelessness in our community. Not that you might not want to tweak it, but that's pretty darn good. I think that's what we've been talking about, no matter what body we've been describing.
But yeah.
Yeah.
So what good mission statement's not?
I know, right?
So a couple things, and we played around with those ideas around membership, and we need to come back to figure out how we tee this up. Two things. My guess is we want to be very careful about bringing something fully baked back to either body. Because when you bring it fully baked, you don't get that level of conversational input. One. Two, we may want to think about how we move through the interim, if we're able to move it, because I would really recommend a transitional board made up of a collection of people both from the governance board for COC currently and the homelessness commission, so think about that. But this is one kicker that keeps coming up, so I'm going to pose it today. Let's have a question. We heard two different approaches from other cities. One, a membership selected the candidates and the mayor approved that selection. And the other ones, the mayor recommended slate and the membership approved it.
It's actually three.
Oh, really?
Yes. One is a blended model with those two where, so one, like you said, mayor puts forward a slate, COC approves, the other one reverse. And then there is one, if it's in the charter where the mayor approves,
so there's elected and appointed.
Vice mayor approving some and COC approving some.
Can we only have about 15 minutes left. I just kind of want to have a conversation about those three models. So the last model is an elected / appointed model.
So the last thing is, so the mayor would have a certain number of slots that the mayor appoints to this particular body. The membership of the COC would appoint a certain number of people to that body. Neither one has to.
Kind of, they would elect it. So a membership would elect, not appoint. A mayor would appoint.
Mayor would appoint some, membership would elect some. And they don't have to be approved by the other entity.
Correct.
I like that
I'm not as crazy about that.
So let's kind of talk about what those might look like and where we come around that, because I guess and Josh, if you have anything to add, I think these are where some of the little sticking points come in, because there's not a perfect model, right? They all work. It's really kind of where our city is and what our city needs. So let's talk about a mayor-appointed board with recommendations from the membership.
Sitting back as a member of the COC, if we send a bunch of names to the mayor and the mayor's like, yeah, that's good, then that's great. But if we send a bunch of names to the mayor and the mayor, again, we're thinking of mayors that are beyond this mayor, decides that they have some other people that they'd like to put on there instead of the ones that we recommended. And how does that make me feel as a member of the COC? The mayor just ignored everything that we asked the mayor to do, and I would then feel incredibly powerless in that scenario. I don't like that.
Maybe mayor appointed by recommendations given by the COC, not appointing herself.
Yeah, but if it's a recommendation, the mayor doesn't have to do it. That's what I'm saying.
Okay.
If the mayor want to put forth some names as part of the slate, great, let's do that. I mean, she should. There's some people that, but to just automatically give them everything, give them
50% or whatever, they can really steer the agenda that way.
So one of the values of, if we modify the current ordinance to reflect COC, the value of the commission as it stands now, where it sits with social services, is we get to have council people on there too. And so you want to think about, where do you want to get your input from with that? Is that you ask the mayor for their recommendations regarding council people, and that comes in. So think about where we want to get information. I'm going to tell you, I have no opinion on this whatsoever.
Well, the mayor also may be aware of things that everyone's not aware of that person needs to be on,
I mean, there's always the possibility of doing something like, a third is elected by the membership, a third is appointed by the mayor, and another third is agreed upon between the two. Or a third is appointed through the council.
Okay, so that's one of the options they gave. They said mayor appoints some, city council has some, state reps have some seats, and then the COC elects some. So it was really four places.
Can I just say that I don't want state reps being part of our...
Yeah, I'm just saying what they have recommended.
I don't think she means state from the House of Representatives.
I would think like DHS. You might want the commissioner of DHS or somebody like that.
Do you?
Or THDA
or mental health.
Or
yeah. I think that's what they were talking about. I don't know. We'll have to ask. But I also heard her say, "Don't dismiss that we have the government at the table."
Right.
She said that right after that.
No, I think the government gives us a lot of leverage and a lot of, that's what government's supposed to do. Govern its people. So, they should be at the table. They have a responsibility to be at the table.
Right.
So we need to ensure that in some way. But it doesn't need to be totally, not totally is the wrong word, but we just make sure that there's enough influence from the people who are carrying out the work, too, who aren't getting dictated to just because somebody has an agenda.
Okay, we're in the mud a little bit, and we got to stay in the mud for a while. I don't know how to get out of it.
Yeah.
Let's think about it this way. We heard some examples, and we don't have to, just a starting off point is, we heard from a 9-person board up to a 33-person board.
And they said typical is 25.
And they said typical is 25. Is that a fair number to start with?
What did our charter have, that 21?
25 is our cap. Selected 15.
I don't think you want more than that at this point.
So some of it is, let's think about if we brought on 25 people, right? Kind of where those 25 might come from. Things like, and this is why I just want to spark our thinking. We'll come back in, and our next time is probably putting some meat to this, or having people work on some ideas before we come back to the table, is if you have 25 people, do we want council representation?
I think so.
So right now on the commission, there's 4 seats. Yes? So you start doing math.
Which are part of the mayor's appointees.
Right. So if you have 25 and you
Maybe
put 4
maybe
council.
that's
City council pieces, they're not part of the committee?
No, they are appointed by the
council.
vice mayor.
The vice mayor.
Okay, so then that's this piece right here, the city council has some.
Yes.
We have 4.
So we also have 4 seats for people, 3 seats for lived experience.
Yes.
We have, right now, on the commission, we have 3 people who have, are living the experience, have had living experience. I'm just going to kind of throw these out, because this is going to be math as we kind of go through this.
But you've got some on the COC that already have lived experience too, right?
We had 2.
Right.
Minimum of 2.
Well, and we can't underestimate that some people with lived experience also hit another category.
That's right. Good point.
And we have how many, I could pull the document out, gosh, that would be easy. We have the Director of Social Services, MDHA, Health Department, NCAC, Action Commission, Police Department.
Those were all kind of ex officios
Right.
to be informed and inform the dialogue and discussion, but they cannot vote.
Right, and so this, I think, as we keep moving into this new entity, is you need to think about who needs to be around the decision. At that level, the decision or recommending body, that would be your would be the governance board.
So this board will be 25 voting members.
Correct. But you got to understand about what the governance board
Right.
votes on and what the membership. We'd be moving to a whole different construct because COC is a membership body.
Are we wallowing now?
Yeah,
still
yeah,
wallowing?
we're just, yeah.
Okay. Josh, as it stands now, if Renee were on another board or commission, could she vote? Because,
No.
Yeah, I didn't think so.
In an official board or commission.
Right. Oh, right.
And so, when we move into this world of, the kind of the Ryan White Planning Council, that's not a board or commission, we have an enormous amount of flexibility.
Yep.
And so that helps a lot.
Okay. Good point. That's pretty much
So you'd have to figure out, would we be a planning council or would we be a commission, and what's the value?
Is that the terms?
Well, I think you already decided that. I mean, I think you already said you're not going to be a standalone board or commission. A
No,
department.
we're going to combine COC. You could still be a commission with combining COC.
An
couldn't you?
unofficial commission, just like we are now.
Yeah, you would just expand
That's what
it.
I'm saying. If you take away that idea of having a department governed by a board or commission, that's what I mean by an official board or commission.
That helps.
That is, it's equivalent to the Social Services Commission.
Yeah.
Right. So you take that off the table, which you did a couple hours ago. Now we're in the world of unofficial, housed under Social Services Commission. Now you've got all the flexibility that you need to.
Got it. So those department heads, if we could vote.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
We
So would it be
could.
the homelessness? I mean,
So-
You
sometimes it
could
would be
still-
the
I mean-
it could be the planning council, right?
Yeah, you could call it something else.
The Continuum of Care Planning Council.
Yeah.
Would sound a heck of a lot better than a commission, since we really are not a commission.
To me, it's
It's
as long
confusing
as.
to everyone, putting those
And
unless you're considered commission.
what matters to me, having done this for a long, long time, is that it has the oomph and the buy-in, oomph and buy-in, whatever, call it whatever, pink unicorn. I mean,
Yeah, that's fine, except we all know that words have power.
oh, I
So
totally agree. Totally agree.
Making it, calling it what it is, I mean, I think that for me, that has been part of my confusion in some places, and not, is that we are not really a commission, yet
Right.
we're called the Homelessness Commission.
Right.
So that, we need to fix that. Even if we end up not doing anything else, we should fix that.
Yeah. But so the other thing about the departments is this, we created, or the commission created this interdepartmental, what's it called exactly, Judy? Because words matter.
Mayor's Interdepartmental Council on Homelessness.
So it is where the departments meet and talk about a whole lot of things. And it is, it's funny, we weren't getting its needs, that set of needs met in the commission, even though you had a lot of department heads there. So that is another factor that might speak to that you don't necessarily have to keep all 8 or however many are here, department head types in this new model.
So it seems to
Because
me
they can be part of that continuum.
And they are, yes.
I'm going to tell you the one danger we have, I'll just say it, in doing this piece, is you want to make sure that you don't spread everything out so much that your decision-making becomes very insular, and
Right.
and it's like pseudo involvement.
Yep.
So you think about the value of having the interdepartmental council. Sometimes those people need to get in a room and talk to each other. It's not helpful to have it in a different, and yet they need to be around the table other times having different conversations. So some of this is figuring out how do we structure it in a way that allows that to both happen. Otherwise, we make it so pretty that it becomes non-functional.
But if you look at the history of the commission and participation, I think one of the reasons you see a lot of surrogates and not department heads come is, they don't vote. And, I think it's easy to bag on them, but I think it's also, a factor of a department head's choosing how to use their time.
And if we were a planning council, would that still be true?
That they couldn't vote?
Right.
They would be able to vote on a planning council.
Just an idea.
That's powerful.
That's very powerful.
Sure is.
Which, by the way, well said. Thanks for your commitment to coming.
Absolutely. I was thinking, yeah.
And if you think about who keeps showing up, thank you.
Yep.
Okay, we're running out of time. So here's my... We're meeting again when? Do we have a time?
We have set 2 weeks from today.
I'm going to mess this up.
Okay. I had put the 15th down on that timeline I sent everybody. I don't know if you had, another one.
No, that was I'm going by the original every 2 weeks, and then
Okay. I just didn't, I missed that on my timeline that went to the whole world. So.
It's up to all of you.
Okay.
So that would be the 5th.
5th works for me, but you're not going to be here, are you, Liz?
September 5th?
Yeah.
Jeez. Could we do 10 to 12 on the 5th?
I can't come on the 5th at all.
I thought we decided to 12 because 5th was.
Oh yeah, I have us at the 12th.
Yeah.
Look at that.
I thought we had it. I didn't change it on my calendar. I thought I was waiting for
Thank you.
But yeah,
I don't have it.
Conversation? Have it on the 12th instead
But
of
I'll put it in.
Done, Jessica.
So we're doing it to 12th?
12.
12.
I can't come to 12 either.
Well, change your schedule.
When's next COC governance meeting?
I'm looking. So we have a commission meeting on the 1st. Okay, so we said, okay, we didn't decide the next governance board meeting for the COC because we have a new board. We set a deadline of September 21st to decide when that meeting would be.
So the question for both of you and I is, if we're not on the governance board, do we need to be in this?
That's another question that I did not raise.
Yeah, we talked about that earlier. I'm not either. Yeah.
Our recommendation that we're going to bring to you is that to let this task force remain intact, but you all can, that body can decide what they're going to do with it.
What time are we starting on this?
We have an exec at 8:30 then.
8:30?
Yeah, and then
There's 3 of us, yeah.
Oh.
30. Catherine, is that all right if we meet in your absence?
That's fine, I'm just letting you.
What time on the 12th?
9:30. But here's my question.
9:30 on the
We're
12th.
start at 8:30.
Oh, that's
No,
what
we have an executive meeting on the 19th.
Jeez Louise. Oh yeah, which date is it?
We usually have the 3rd Tuesday.
I don't know which one that is.
19th.
All right, so we're not meeting, so just this on the 12th.
Just it's up to, the whole executive committee
We
is here.
normally
It's up to
would,
you
yes.
Hey, would it be, can we just do the 12th? Mina, can you do the, let's just do the
Is
12th.
that for committee on the 12th too?
Yeah, let's just do it all. It's,
Okay.
Works for me.
That's the same meeting as the data.
So that'll be 8:30.
Okay.
yes.
Okay.
All right, here's my question. We're getting into some of the devils in the details. Is anybody willing to take a stab at kind of the possible configuration of the membership of the governance? If we know we have 25 slots, what it might look like? Anybody willing to say, hey, here's an idea? I think it might be easier to work that way than to try to keep building it.
Everybody's looking away.
Guess not. We're doing it in the room, huh?
Fine.
Okay.
That's fine for one of us.
Yeah, I don't know either way.
I can take a stab at it. Can I have a chat with you about some? Okay.
Yeah. I just think it's easier to say, hey, here's a concept, let's pull it apart rather than keep trying to build it.
But I can do that.
Okay. The other thing is that I think it seems to me that whether we go for appointed and elected, recommended from the body to the mayor, recommended from the mayor to the body, one is I think it'd be helpful to know kind of where this mayor sits in that. Can you all ask?
Mm-hmm.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
And Dale, we don't have time to go into it, but I would really love to hear your concerns about a portion of it elected, a portion of it appointed at some point. So as we come through, I think we need to make the pros and cons. What else? Our goal was to get us to a point where we could move this ahead. So if we can get some of the logistic pieces done, and our homework would be to go back through, I would use the Continuum of Care Governance Charter and go through and look at, to us, what questions we would have about what's not applicable moving forward. I think that's a much better place to start than the Commission's charter. Make sense? So we'd be looking at the makeup, the charter, how people would come on to the body, and whether or not we want to move to being a planning council versus a commission. Is that what I'm hearing our next levels of decisions are? What am I missing? Thank you all for your time. What a productive meeting. Historical. Somebody should make we should have a picture. Historical.
So what do we need in terms of proposing what you charge?
Have to.
This has been a service of the Metro Nashville Network. If you would like to see this presentation again, or for more information about this and other programs, visit nashville.gov.